Welcome, Guardian of Shadows, to a journey through the most forbidden corridors of Gotham's darkness, where even the Dark Knight himself has walked paths so treacherous that they were meant to remain hidden from the light of day. Tonight, we descend into the vault of secrets that DC has tried to bury. The moments too dark, too brutal, too psychologically devastating for mainstream consumption. Let the whisper of Cape through midnight air and the distant echo of a child's scream carry you into restful slumber as we explore the deepest shadows that have shaped the Caped Crusader's tormented soul. In the shadowed corners of Gotham's most guarded secrets lies a tale so devastating that even the keepers of Batman's legacy sought to bury it beneath layers of censorship and editorial constraint. A story that reveals the precise moment when the Dark Knight's greatest fear was not merely realized, but exceeded in ways that would forever alter the very foundation of his war against crime. This is the chronicle of innocence, systematically destroyed, of trust weaponized into torture, of a young hero transformed into a living nightmare through 3 weeks of hell that no child should ever endure. The boy who would suffer this unimaginable ordeal was Timothy Jackson Drake, the third young soul to take up the mantle of Robin, inheritor of a legacy that promised adventure and purpose, but delivered instead a descent into psychological horror that would haunt both mentor and student for the remainder of their lives. Tim possessed the analytical mind and technological acumen that made him uniquely valuable as Batman's partner, yet these very qualities would make his eventual breaking all the more complete and devastating when they were turned against the man he had sworn to serve. The trap that ensnared Robin was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications, orchestrated by the one criminal whose understanding of psychological warfare exceeded even Batman's considerable knowledge of the human mind's capacity for both heroism and horror. The Joker had spent years studying his nemesis, learning not just the Dark Knight's methods and weaknesses, but the deeper patterns of attachment and protection that defined Bruce Wayne's approach to mentorship and family. Harley Quinn's role in the initial capture was crucial, yet seemingly innocuous, her apparent helplessness and confusion serving as the perfect bait for a young hero whose instincts toward protection and rescue were as finely tuned as his detective skills. The distress call that drew Robin into the abandoned warehouse district of Gotham's industrial zone was crafted with meticulous attention to psychological detail, designed to exploit every heroic impulse that had been carefully cultivated through months of training and partnership with the Batman. The moment of capture was swift and efficient, utilizing advanced chemical restraints that overcame even Tim's enhanced physical conditioning, while ensuring that his mind remained clear and aware throughout the ordeal that would follow. The Joker's methodology was not random violence, but systematic psychological deconstruction, a carefully planned campaign designed to accomplish something far more sophisticated than simple murder or even conventional torture. The location chosen for this 3-week nightmare was a forgotten section of Arkham Asylum itself. Chambers that had been sealed and abandoned after previous administrative scandals, rooms that existed in no official records, and were accessible only to those with intimate knowledge of the facility's hidden architecture. Here, in the very heart of Gotham's monument to madness, the Clown Prince of Crime established his laboratory for the systematic destruction of everything that made Timothy Drake who he was. The first week of captivity was devoted to physical conditioning and psychological preparation, techniques borrowed from military interrogation manuals and enhanced with the Joker's own innovations in the art of mental destruction. Sleep deprivation was combined with sensory manipulation, creating states of consciousness where reality and hallucination became indistinguishable, where the victim's own memories could be rewritten through careful application of drugs and suggestion. The genius of the Joker's approach lay in his understanding that Robin's greatest strength was also his greatest vulnerability, the unwavering trust he placed in Batman and the mission they shared. Rather than trying to break this bond through crude threats or violence, the Joker sought to corrupt it, to transform love into hatred, loyalty into betrayal, protection into abandonment through carefully crafted psychological scenarios that made Robin question everything he had believed about his mentor and himself. The chemical cocktail administered to Tim during this period was a masterwork of pharmacological manipulation, combining elements of fear toxin, Mad Hatter's mind control serums, and the Joker's own specially developed compounds designed to increase suggestibility while maintaining consciousness. The result was a state of awareness that remained intact enough to experience every moment of the transformation, while being unable to resist the systematic rewriting of personality and memory that defined the second phase of the Port ordeal. During the second week, the true horror began as the Joker initiated the process that would transform Robin into a miniature version of himself, complete with the trademark grin, maniacal laugh, and twisted worldview that characterized the Clown Prince of Crime. This was not mere costume and makeup, but fundamental alteration of neural pathways, the rewiring of synaptic connections to create genuine psychological change rather than simple behavioral mimicry. The techniques employed during this phase combined classical conditioning with advanced neurotechnology, creating association patterns that linked pleasure with violence, satisfaction with chaos, love with destruction. Every positive memory Tim possessed of his life with Bruce Wayne was systematically corrupted, recontextualized as evidence of manipulation and betrayal rather than genuine care and protection. The psychological torture was accompanied by physical modifications that were superficial yet symbolically devastating, alterations to appearance that served to reinforce the internal changes while providing constant visual reminders of what the boy was becoming. The familiar red, green, and yellow of the Robin costume was replaced with a mockery that combined those colors with the Joker's purple and white, creating a visual representation of innocence corrupted and heroism perverted. Most insidiously, the Joker's manipulation included carefully crafted scenarios designed to make Robin complicit in his own transformation, situations where he was forced to make choices that advanced the process while believing he was resisting it. These psychological double binds created genuine guilt and self-loathing that reinforced the transformation while providing the Joker with authentic emotional responses to exploit and enhance. The third week marked the completion of the transformation and the implementation of its ultimate purpose, the creation of a weapon specifically designed to destroy Batman, not through physical combat, but through the corruption of everything he held sacred. The Robin who emerged from this process retained all of Tim Drake's memories and knowledge, but filtered through a worldview that reinterpreted every act of heroism as hypocrisy, every moment of protection as possessiveness, every expression of love as manipulation. The revelation of Batman's secret identity came not through traditional interrogation techniques, but as the natural result of the psychological conditioning that had transformed Robin's understanding of his relationship with Sir Bruce Wayne. The boy who had once guarded this secret with his life now offered it freely, genuinely believing that he was exposing a fraud rather than betraying a trust, convinced that Bruce Wayne's double life was evidence of deception rather than dedication. The moment when Batman finally located his missing partner marked the beginning of a confrontation that would test every principle the Dark Knight held sacred, forcing him to face the possibility that his greatest fear had been realized in ways far worse than he had ever imagined. The figure who greeted him in the depths of Arkham was recognizably Tim Drake, yet utterly transformed, possessed of all the boy's intelligence and training, but dedicated now to purposes that represented the complete inversion of everything Robin had once stood for. The psychological warfare that followed was conducted with all the sophistication that the Joker's corrupted protégé could bring to bear, utilizing intimate knowledge of Batman's methods, motivations, and emotional vulnerabilities to create attacks that struck far deeper than any physical blow. Every word was chosen to maximize psychological damage, every gesture calculated to remind the Dark Knight of his failure to protect the child who had trusted him completely. The Joker's presence during this confrontation was that of a proud teacher, displaying his most successful student, delighting in the demonstration of how thoroughly he had succeeded in corrupting not just Robin's body and mind, but the very relationship that had defined both mentor and student. His laughter echoed through the chamber as Batman struggled to find some trace of the boy he had failed to protect, some remnant of Timothy Drake that might yet be saved from the nightmare he had become. The gun that the transformed Robin pointed at Batman represented more than a threat of physical death. It was the ultimate symbol of how completely the Joker had succeeded in his mission of corruption. The weapon trembled in hands that had once been dedicated to preservation and protection, held by a mind that now viewed Batman not as a mentor and father figure, but as the architect of every suffering and disappointment that had defined his young life. Yet in that moment of ultimate horror, when it seemed that the Joker's victory was complete and irreversible, something stirred in the depths of Tim's consciousness that even the most sophisticated psychological conditioning could not entirely erase. The love and trust that had bound him to Bruce Wayne had been buried beneath layers of chemical manipulation and neural rewriting, but it had not been completely destroyed, merely transformed into something that could serve as the foundation for one final act of heroism. The gunshot that rang through the abandoned chamber was fired not at Batman, but at the Joker himself, the ultimate rejection of everything the transformation had been designed to accomplish. In choosing to destroy his tormentor rather than his mentor, Robin demonstrated that some bonds transcend even the most complete psychological manipulation, that love can survive even the most systematic attempts to corrupt and destroy it. The aftermath of this moment revealed the true scope of the damage that had been inflicted upon both victim and rescuer, as Batman cradled the broken form of his former partner while struggling to comprehend the full implications of what had occurred. The boy who had once embodied hope and renewal now represented the ultimate failure of the mission that had defined Bruce Wayne's adult life, proof that his crusade against crime inevitably consumed those he sought to protect. The psychological trauma that both mentor and student carried away from this encounter would influence every aspect of their relationship for years to come, creating barriers of guilt and fear that would never be entirely overcome. Batman's vow to never again endanger a young life in service of his mission was born from this moment, a recognition that the price of his war against crime was too high when measured against the innocence of those who chose to stand beside him. The recovery process that followed was lengthy and incomplete, marked by breakthrough moments that offered hope of genuine healing, followed by setbacks that revealed the depth of the psychological scarring that had been inflicted. Tim's memories of his time as the Joker's captive remained fragmented and contradictory, protective amnesia combining with chemical damage to create gaps in his recollection that might have been merciful had they not also included the loss of many positive memories that had once given his life meaning and purpose. The medical and psychiatric professionals who attempted to understand and treat Tim's condition found themselves confronting the limits of their knowledge and expertise when faced with the systematic psychological deconstruction that had been visited upon their patient. The combination of chemical alteration, conditioning techniques, and pure psychological trauma created a syndrome that had no precedent in the literature, a form of damage that challenged fundamental assumptions about the resilience of the human mind and spirit. The impact upon Bruce Wayne was equally profound, though less immediately apparent, manifesting itself in increased isolation, heightened paranoia, and a growing reluctance to form the kinds of close relationships that had once sustained his mission and provided him with emotional stability. The guilt of having failed to protect him from such systematic torture, combined with fear that his enemies might employ similar techniques against future partners, to create a psychological burden that would influence every decision he made regarding the recruitment and training of allies. The Joker's triumph in this instance was not measured in death or destruction, but in the successful demonstration that Batman's greatest strength could be transformed into his most devastating weakness, that the very compassion and protective instinct that made him a hero could be weaponized against him through the systematic corruption of those he sought to protect. The knowledge that such techniques existed and could be employed by other enemies created a permanent shadow over every relationship the Dark Knight would attempt to form in the future. The broader implications of this encounter extended beyond the personal trauma of the individuals involved to encompass questions about the ethics and sustainability of using child soldiers in the war against crime, regardless of their willingness to serve or the nobility of the cause they championed. The transformation of Robin into a weapon designed to destroy Batman served as a stark reminder that good intentions were insufficient protection against enemies willing to employ any means to achieve their goals. The lasting legacy of those 3 weeks in hell was not merely the psychological scarring of victim and rescuer, but the fundamental alteration of the dynamic that had defined the Batman family, the recognition that innocence once lost could never be fully restored, and that some victories came at prices too high to be justified by any conceivable benefit. The boy who had once been Timothy Drake returned from his ordeal forever changed, carrying within himself the knowledge of what he had been forced to become and the memory of how completely he had been broken. In the years that followed, the relationship between Batman and this damaged Robin would evolve into something unprecedented in the history of their partnership, marked by mutual understanding of shared trauma, combined with the recognition that some experiences create barriers that can never be entirely overcome. The trust that had once been absolute became cautious and conditional, love tempered by fear, protection shadowed by the knowledge of how easily it could be corrupted and perverted. The echo of the Joker's laughter that had filled that abandoned chamber would continue to haunt both mentor and student for the remainder of their lives. A reminder that, in the war between order and chaos, innocence was not merely a casualty, but a weapon that could be turned against everything it had once represented. The boy who had sought to follow in Batman's footsteps had instead become living proof that some paths lead not to heroism but to horror, that the very act of choosing to fight monsters carried with it the risk of becoming something monstrous in return. In the realm of nightmares that exist at the intersection of parental love and heroic duty, there unfolds a tale so devastating in its emotional brutality that it challenges the very foundations upon which the Batman legend was built, a vision of loss so complete and final that even the Dark Knight's legendary resolve crumbles beneath its weight. This is the story of a father's worst fear made manifest, of watching helplessly as the child you have sworn to protect dies in your arms while the world burns around you, transformed by grief into something unrecognizable and terrible. The nightmare begins in what should have been a routine patrol through Gotham's shadowed streets, where Batman, Batgirl, and Robin moved with the practiced precision of a family forged in battle, their coordination perfected through countless nights of shared danger and mutual trust. Barbara Gordon had long since proven herself worthy of the cape she wore, her intelligence and determination matching her father's legendary dedication to justice while exceeding it in ways that filled both men with pride and terror in equal measure. The Scarecrow's latest scheme represented a return to his most fundamental obsession with the architecture of fear. Yet his methods had evolved beyond simple terror-inducing toxins to encompass more sophisticated explorations of psychological warfare and the systematic exploitation of human vulnerability. His targets were not chosen randomly, but selected with careful attention to their symbolic value and their capacity to generate the kind of widespread panic that fed his academic curiosity about mass hysteria and social breakdown. The pursuit that led to tragedy began with what seemed like standard criminal behavior: armed robbery, conducted by thugs whose masks bore the distinctive stitched features that marked them as servants of the Master of Fear. Yet beneath this facade of conventional crime lay a more sophisticated trap, designed not merely to capture Batman and his allies, but to expose them to psychological pressures that would test the limits of their sanity and resolve. Barbara's decision to pursue Scarecrow onto the rooftop of the Gotham Trust building was motivated by tactical considerations that seemed perfectly sound at the time, the kind of split-second judgment call that had served the Bat family well in countless previous encounters. The building's height provided both strategic advantage and symbolic significance, its position at the heart of Gotham's financial district, making it the perfect stage for whatever demonstration of terror Crane had planned. The confrontation that unfolded on that windswept rooftop followed patterns that had become familiar through years of similar encounters, with Scarecrow's psychological games meeting the combined determination and skill of Gotham's protectors. Yet something was different this time. A desperation in the Master of Fear's tactics that suggested more than simple criminal ambition was at stake, as if the outcome of this particular battle carried weight that transcended immediate concerns about crime and punishment. The fear toxin that Scarecrow employed during this encounter was not his standard formulation, but something far more insidious and targeted, designed not to create random terror, but to generate specific nightmares tailored to each victim's deepest psychological vulnerabilities. For Barbara, the compound awakened visions of her greatest fear, the revelation of her secret identity to her father, combined with her own death as the ultimate consequence of her choice to follow Batman into the shadows. The ledge that became the stage for the final act of this tragedy was narrow and treacherous, made more dangerous by the combination of Gotham's perpetual wind and the disorienting effects of Crane's enhanced fear toxin. The pursuit that brought both hunter and hunted to this precarious perch was driven by determination on both sides. Batgirl's commitment to stopping Scarecrow's scheme matched against his desperate need to complete whatever psychological experiment had motivated his latest crime spree. The moment of the fall was both inevitable and impossible to prevent. A convergence of circumstances that transformed routine heroics into irreversible catastrophe in the span of a heartbeat. The section of rooftop that gave way beneath Barbara's feet had been weakened by previous structural damage, creating a trap that neither she nor her quarry could have anticipated until it was far too late to avoid the consequences. The sight of Batgirl plummeting toward the street below activated every protective instinct that defined Batman's relationship with his allies. Yet the physics of gravity and distance made rescue impossible, despite his desperate attempts to reach her. Before she struck the pavement, the cape that had so often served as wings to carry her safely through Gotham's night sky became instead a shroud that marked her passage from life to death in the time it took for Commissioner Gordon to look up from the police car she would strike. The cruel irony that placed James Gordon directly beneath his daughter's fall transformed what might have been a private tragedy into a public revelation of devastating proportions. As the man who had spent his career protecting Gotham's citizens found himself powerless to save the one person who meant more to him than life itself, the impact that ended Barbara's existence shattered far more than bone and flesh, destroying the careful compartmentalization that had allowed both Gordons to serve the cause of justice, while maintaining the fiction that their family remained separate from their professional duties. The removal of Barbara's mask as she lay dying in her father's arms was not performed by enemy action or journalistic investigation, but by the simple necessity of clearing her airways in a desperate attempt to preserve life that had already fled. The face that Gordon saw revealed not the stranger he might have expected, but the daughter he had raised, loved, and unknowingly sent into battle every night she disappeared to pursue her secret crusade against crime. The final words that passed between father and daughter carried the weight of a lifetime of unspoken truths and carefully maintained deceptions. As Barbara's fading consciousness struggled to bridge the gap between the girl James Gordon had raised and the hero he had unknowingly worked beside for years, the confession of her dual identity came not as revelation but as recognition of what some part of him had always known yet refused to acknowledge: the understanding that his daughter had inherited his commitment to justice along with his willingness to sacrifice everything in its service. Batman's arrival at the scene of this tragedy came too late to prevent the fall, but in time to witness its aftermath: the destruction of the most important relationship in his network of allies, and the transformation of his greatest supporter within law enforcement into an enemy consumed by grief and rage. The Dark Knight's attempts to explain the circumstances that had led to Barbara's death were met with the raw fury of a father who had lost everything that gave his life meaning, accusations that cut far deeper than any physical wound, because they contained elements of truth that Batman could neither deny nor adequately defend against. Commissioner Gordon's immediate response to his daughter's death was to treat it not as tragic accident, but as murder committed by the man who had drawn her into a war that no child should have been asked to fight, regardless of her age, training, or willingness to serve. The badge and authority that Gordon had always used in service of justice became weapons directed against the Batman, as he mobilized every resource at his disposal to capture and punish the one he held responsible for Barbara's destruction. The manhunt that followed transformed Gotham City into a battleground where former allies became implacable enemies, as Gordon's grief-fueled rage infected the entire police force with suspicion and hatred directed at the figures who had once served as their unofficial partners in maintaining order. The careful balance that had allowed Batman and his allies to operate with tacit official approval collapsed overnight, replaced by active hostility that made every street corner a potential ambush and every shadow a hiding place for enemies who knew their methods and capabilities intimately. The media response to these events amplified their impact far beyond the immediate participants, as news outlets struggled to understand and explain the transformation of Gotham's most respected police commissioner into the leader of a crusade against the city's most famous protector. The revelation that Batgirl had been Gordon's daughter added layers of complexity to a story that already challenged public understanding of the relationships between law enforcement and vigilante justice. The arrest of Alfred Pennyworth represented an escalation of Gordon's campaign that moved beyond the symbolic into the realm of genuine legal jeopardy, as Batman's most trusted ally found himself facing charges that could have resulted in life imprisonment if the case had proceeded to trial. The butler's dignified acceptance of his fate in service of protecting Bruce Wayne's identity demonstrated the depth of loyalty that bound the Batman family together, even as that family was being systematically dismantled by forces they had never anticipated facing. Nightwing's capture and imprisonment served as further evidence that Gordon's rage had evolved beyond personal vendetta into systematic warfare against everyone who had played a role in Barbara's transformation from daughter to hero. The young man who had once been welcomed in the Gordon household as an extension of their family found himself treated as an enemy combatant, His protests of innocence met with the implacable determination of a father who could find peace only through the complete destruction of those he blamed for his loss. Tim Drake's horror at witnessing the collapse of everything he had believed about the nobility and purpose of their mission reflected the broader trauma that affected everyone connected to the Batman's crusade, as they struggled to understand how protecting the innocent had led to such devastating consequences for those who mattered most. The young Robin's pleas for Batman to take action to free their captured allies met with a paralysis born of guilt and uncertainty, as Bruce Wayne found himself unable to distinguish between justice and vengeance in his own response to the crisis. The revelation that Bane had allied himself with Commissioner Gordon represented perhaps the most shocking development in this cascade of betrayals and reversals, as the man who had once broken Batman's back now served as an instrument of official justice rather than criminal ambition. The partnership between the monster who had conquered Gotham and the police commissioner who had protected it created a grotesque inversion of normal moral categories, forcing Batman to confront enemies who claimed the authority of law while employing the methods of terrorism. The final confrontation between Batman and this unlikely alliance tested every principle that had guided the Dark Knight's crusade, as he found himself forced to choose between his commitment to protecting innocent life and his need to rescue those who had served faithfully at his side. The battle with Bane took place against a backdrop of moral complexity that traditional heroics could not adequately address, as each blow struck carried implications that extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations. The rescue of Commissioner Gordon from Bane's ultimate betrayal demonstrated that even in his grief-maddened state, the man retained enough of his essential decency to recognize genuine evil when it threatened innocent life. The moment when Gordon found himself dependent upon Batman's protection created a brief opportunity for communication between former allies, yet the fundamental breach caused by Barbara's death proved too deep to be healed by simple recognition of shared danger. The awakening that revealed the entire sequence of events to be the product of Scarecrow's enhanced fear toxin working upon Barbara's unconscious mind created a moment of relief so profound that it bordered on the bowed, transcendent. Yet the psychological impact of the nightmare could not be dismissed simply because its events had not literally occurred. The fears and anxieties that had given the hallucination its power were real and persistent, reflecting genuine concerns about the risks inherent in her double life and the potential consequences for everyone she loved. Barbara's decision to confess her secret identity to her father following her awakening represented a direct response to the terror she had experienced, a recognition that the fear of discovery was in some ways more destructive than discovery itself might prove to be. Yet her ultimate choice to maintain her secret reflected wisdom, born of understanding that some truths, however honest, carried the potential to cause more harm than the lies they would replace. The conversation with her father that followed this decision revealed the depth of James Gordon's love and respect for his daughter, while also demonstrating his intuitive understanding that she had found purpose and meaning in activities that extended beyond his ability to protect or control. His expression of pride in her achievements, offered without specific knowledge of what those achievements were, provided the emotional security she needed to continue her work while maintaining the boundaries that kept their relationship intact. The lasting impact of this fear-induced nightmare extended far beyond the immediate trauma of experiencing such vivid images of loss and betrayal, creating permanent changes in how Barbara approached both her relationship with her father and her work as Batgirl. The knowledge that her deepest fears centered not on personal harm but on the destruction of her most important relationships informed every decision she made regarding the balance between heroic duty and family obligations. The broader implications of this experience for the entire Batman family revealed the psychological pressures that constantly threatened to undermine their mission, as each member struggled with the recognition that their commitment to protecting strangers necessarily placed at risk the people they loved most. The nightmare scenarios that Scarecrow's toxin had made manifest were not entirely fictional, but rather amplified versions of possibilities that haunted every moment of their dangerous lives. The episode served as a reminder that the greatest enemies of Gotham's protectors were not the criminals they fought, but the fears they carried within themselves. The recognition that heroism required constant sacrifice of personal happiness and security in service of abstract principles that could never fully justify the costs they imposed upon those who chose to serve. The shadow of what might have been cast its darkness over every subsequent adventure, a permanent reminder that even victories came at prices that could destroy everything they were meant to protect. The relationship between Batman and Commissioner Gordon was forever altered by this glimpse into what their alliance might become if tragedy struck at the heart of their shared commitment to justice, creating new layers of understanding and mutual respect while also establishing boundaries that had not previously existed. The knowledge that grief could transform even the most honorable person into something unrecognizable served as a constant warning about the fragility of the moral framework that sustained their partnership. In the end, the nightmare that never truly happened proved more educational and transformative than many real experiences, teaching everyone involved about the true nature of their fears, while providing them with insights into the psychological pressures that shaped their choices and defined their relationships. The awakening from this particular darkness brought not relief but deeper understanding of the shadows that would always lurk at the edges of their mission. The recognition that some prices were too high to pay regardless of the nobility of the cause they served. In the annals of heroic compassion, few moments shine with such quiet dignity as the scene that unfolded in the sterile corridors of a government facility, where children with extraordinary abilities were housed not as students or patients, but as potential weapons in humanity's arsenal against threats, both terrestrial and cosmic. This is the story of a final goodbye that revealed the true heart of Batman's heroism, a demonstration that the greatest victories are sometimes achieved not through violence or strategy, but through the simple act of staying present with someone who faces their darkest hour alone. The child known as Ace had never experienced what most would consider a normal childhood. Her early years marked by the manifestation of psychic abilities so powerful and uncontrolled that they posed an existential threat to everyone around her. Born into a world that feared and misunderstood her capabilities, she had been separated from her family not through malice, but through the terrible necessity of protecting innocent lives from powers that could reshape reality according to the whims and nightmares of an untrained young mind. The government facility that became Ace's home was designed with the dual purpose of containing her abilities while attempting to understand and potentially harness them for national security purposes. A clinical environment where every interaction was monitored and every relationship carefully regulated to prevent emotional attachments that might trigger unpredictable manifestations of her power. The scientists and administrators who oversaw her care were not cruel in their intentions, yet their systematic approach to managing her abilities inevitably dehumanized the child they sought to protect and study. The evolution of Ace's psychic capabilities followed patterns that challenged every existing theory about the nature and limitations of human potential, as her initial ability to create convincing hallucinations gradually developed into something far more dangerous and unprecedented. The progression from simple illusion to genuine reality alteration occurred so gradually that the facility's monitoring systems failed to detect the transition until its implications became impossible to ignore or contain through conventional means. The breakthrough that transformed Ace from a subject of scientific study into a threat requiring immediate intervention came during a routine psychological evaluation. when her emotional distress at being separated from a favorite caretaker manifested as a localized alteration of physical law that created impossible architectural spaces within the confines of her containment cell, the walls that bent according to her unconscious will, and the gravity that flowed in directions she imagined rather than those dictated by physics, demonstrated that her abilities had transcended the boundaries between mental projection and material manipulation. The Royal Flush Gang that Ace created as companions and protectors was not a deliberate act of criminal organization, but rather the unconscious manifestation of a lonely child's need for family and belonging, her psychic abilities giving form and substance to imaginary friends who possessed all the power necessary to protect her from a world that seemed determined to treat her as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. These artificial beings, crafted from her memories of playing cards and childhood games, became more real than many naturally born individuals, possessing genuine personalities and motivations that reflected their creator's understanding of loyalty, protection, and unconditional affection. The threat assessment that brought this situation to the attention of Amanda Waller and her colleagues in government oversight agencies was based not on any criminal acts committed by Ace or her artificial family, but on projections of what might occur if her reality-altering abilities continued to develop without constraint or guidance. The mathematical models that predicted widespread devastation in the event of her death painted scenarios of cascading dimensional collapse that could potentially unmake entire cities or even larger geographical regions. Amanda Waller's approach to managing extraordinary threats had always been characterized by ruthless pragmatism and willingness to sacrifice individual lives in service of the greater good. Yet even she struggled with the ethical implications of what her experts recommended as the only viable solution to the Ace problem. The weapon they had developed was designed specifically to end the child's life as quickly and painlessly as possible, a technological mercy killing that would prevent the reality storm her dying brain might unleash, while sparing her the prolonged suffering that her condition would inevitably cause. The selection of Batman as the one to carry out this execution was based on careful analysis of his psychological profile and operational history. The recognition that his combination of tactical skill, moral authority, and emotional resilience made him uniquely qualified to complete such a distasteful mission, while minimizing the risk of compromising factors that might interfere with its success. The briefing that outlined his assignment was delivered with clinical precision, focusing on the technical aspects of the weapon and the projected timeline for the mission while carefully avoiding discussion of the human element that made this task so morally complex. Batman's acceptance of the mission came not from callous indifference to the child's fate, but from his recognition that the alternative scenarios presented by Waller's analysts were genuinely catastrophic in scope, potentially claiming millions of innocent lives if Ace's death was allowed to occur naturally and without technological intervention. The weight of utilitarian calculation that favored one death over countless others was familiar to the Dark Knight from previous missions, yet the target's age and circumstances added layers of moral complexity that challenged even his experienced ethical framework. The approach to Ace's location required careful navigation of security systems designed to contain someone whose abilities transcended normal physical limitations, technological barriers that reflected years of research into psychic phenomena and reality manipulation. The facility's architecture incorporated principles borrowed from theoretical physics and experimental psychology, creating spaces that were intended to limit the scope of Ace's unconscious alterations while providing her with environments that could support some approximation of normal childhood development. The first direct encounter between Batman and Ace occurred in what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary playground, complete with swings, slides, and sandbox equipment that seemed incongruous given the high security nature of the facility that surrounded them. Yet even this apparently innocent environment bore subtle signs of reality alteration, from flowers that bloomed in patterns too perfect to be natural to shadows that fell in directions that defied the position of the overhead lighting. Ace's immediate recognition of Batman's true intentions came not through any verbal confession or obvious behavioral cues, but through the direct psychic contact that her abilities made inevitable, her mind touching his with the same casual ease that a child might reach out to shake hands with a new acquaintance. The invasion of his thoughts was neither malicious nor particularly intrusive, merely the natural result of proximity to someone whose consciousness existed partially outside the normal boundaries of individual identity. The revelation that Batman had not come to kill her but to offer comfort in her final hours created a moment of surprise and gratitude that illuminated the profound loneliness that had defined most of Ace's short existence. Her recognition that someone had chosen compassion over expedience, despite the personal cost such a choice might require. The weapon that he had been given to end her life remained unused and eventually forgotten, set aside in favor of something far more valuable and infinitely more difficult to provide. The connection that formed between the dying child and the Dark Knight was based on their shared understanding of what it meant to lose one's childhood to circumstances beyond personal control, the recognition that both had been forced to mature far earlier than nature intended due to traumatic events that had shaped their subsequent development. Ace's psychic abilities allowed her to perceive the grief and loss that motivated Batman's mission with perfect clarity, while his detective skills enabled him to see past her extraordinary powers to the frightened child beneath. The playground where they spent those final hours became a sanctuary removed from the clinical sterility of the government facility and the harsh calculations of utilitarian ethics, a space where two damaged souls could find momentary peace in each other's company, while the world continued its inexorable progression toward a crisis that neither could prevent or fully understand. The swings moved in gentle arcs that defied physics, the flowers bloomed in impossible colors, and time itself seemed to slow in recognition of the preciousness of these final moments. The conversations that passed between them were not recorded by any surveillance equipment nor preserved in any official report. Private exchanges between two individuals who had found in each other a form of understanding that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. Ace spoke of dreams that would never be fulfilled, and experiences that would forever remain beyond her reach, while Batman shared memories of his own lost childhood and the paths not taken that had led him to his current mission. The gradual failure of Ace's biological systems proceeded according to the medical predictions that had motivated the development of the execution weapon, her brain aneurysm progressing through stages that created increasingly severe reality distortions, as her control over her abilities weakened with her physical condition. The playground around them began to shift and change in response to her deteriorating mental state, reflecting her fears and anxieties in ways that would have been terrifying had Batman not been there to provide emotional stability and reassurance. The moment of her death was marked not by the catastrophic reality storm that government analysts had predicted, but by a gentle restoration of normal physical law, as if the universe itself was expressing gratitude for the compassion that had been shown to one of its most troubled children. The flowers returned to natural colors. The swings moved according to predictable physics, and the shadows fell where geometry dictated they should, leaving behind only the memory of a child who had possessed the power to reshape reality, yet had chosen to spend her final moments in simple human companionship. Amanda Waller's arrival at the scene came hours after Ace's death, her expectation of finding Batman completing his assigned mission, replaced by the discovery that he had chosen a more difficult and ultimately more effective path to the same result. The weapon designed to kill the child lay unused nearby, evidence of a decision that revealed depths of character that Waller had not anticipated despite her extensive psychological profiling of the Dark Knight. The conversation that followed between these two figures, who operated in the shadows of official authority, explored questions about the nature of heroism and the meaning of strength that extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns. As Waller struggled to understand how compassion could be more effective than violence in resolving threats to national security, Batman's explanation of his actions focused not on the utilitarian calculations that had originally justified the mission, but on the recognition that every conscious being deserved dignity in their final moments, regardless of the circumstances that had brought them to such extremity. The broader implications of this encounter extended far beyond the immediate resolution of the Ace situation to encompass fundamental questions about how society should respond to individuals whose abilities or circumstances made them threats to public safety, whether through conscious choice or simple biological accident. The success of Batman's approach suggested that solutions based on understanding and compassion might be more effective than those rooted in fear and expedience, though such methods required resources of time and emotional investment that utilitarian frameworks rarely prioritized. The revelation that this experience had influenced Waller's subsequent decision to create a genetic successor to Batman demonstrated the profound impact that witnessing such selfless compassion had upon someone whose career was built on making the hardest possible choices in service of the greater good. The recognition that the world would eventually need another Dark Knight led to the covert operation that resulted in Terry McGinnis's birth, though the methods employed reflected Waller's continued commitment to achieving necessary outcomes through whatever means proved most efficient. The ethical implications of creating a genetic copy of Batman without his knowledge or consent raised questions about the boundaries between admiration and exploitation that echoed the same moral complexities that had surrounded the original plan to execute Ace before her natural death could indanger innocent lives. The technology that allowed Warren McGinnis's reproductive material to be replaced with Batman's genetic template represented scientific capabilities that challenged traditional assumptions about identity, parenthood, and individual autonomy. Terry McGinnis's discovery of his true genetic heritage years later created a crisis of identity that paralleled in some ways the isolation and confusion that had characterized Ace's short life, as he struggled to understand the implications of learning that his entire existence had been the result of government planning rather than natural chance. The anger and sense of betrayal that accompanied this revelation reflected genuine questions about the ethics of creating life to serve predetermined purposes, regardless of how noble those purposes might be. The reconciliation between Terry and Bruce Wayne that followed this revelation was facilitated by their shared understanding of what it meant to be shaped by forces beyond their control, while still retaining the freedom to choose how to respond to such circumstances. The bond that formed between genetic father and chosen son reflected the same themes of compassion overcoming expedience that had characterized Batman's final hours with Ace, demonstrating that the most important relationships were often those that transcended biological or legal definitions of family. The legacy of that quiet afternoon in an impossible playground extended far beyond the immediate participants to influence an entire generation of heroes who would carry forward the lesson that strength was measured not by the capacity to destroy enemies, but by the willingness to comfort those who faced destruction themselves. The image of Batman sitting beside a dying child, offering nothing more than his presence and understanding, became a defining moment that illuminated the true nature of heroism in ways that no dramatic battle or tactical victory could ever match. In the final analysis, the greatest service that Batman provided to Ace was not preventing her death or eliminating the threat she posed to innocent lives. but rather ensuring that she did not face her end alone and afraid, surrounded by people who saw her only as a problem to be solved, rather than a person deserving of love and respect. The compassion he showed in those final hours represented the highest expression of heroic virtue, the recognition that every conscious being possessed inherent dignity that transcended their utility or threat to others. The memory of Ace's final smile, peaceful and grateful, despite everything she had endured, would remain with Batman for the rest of his career, as a reminder that the most important victories were often the quietest ones, achieved not through force or cleverness, but through the simple act of refusing to abandon those who needed someone to stay with them in their darkest hour, in choosing compassion over expedience, presence over efficiency. He had demonstrated that true heroism lay not in the power to take life, but in the wisdom to honor it, even in its final moments. In the frozen wasteland of human cruelty disguised as corporate efficiency, there exists a tale of love destroyed by greed, of scientific dedication perverted into criminal negligence, and of a man whose desperate attempt to save the one person who gave his life meaning was transformed through bureaucratic indifference into a curse that would define the remainder of his existence. This is the chronicle of Victor Fries, a brilliant researcher whose name would become synonymous with vengeance and ice, yet whose story began not in the cold reaches of hatred, but in the warm embrace of a love so pure that it transcended the boundaries between life and death. The woman who would become both the salvation and damnation of Victor Fries was named Nora, and her presence in his life represented everything that made existence meaningful rather than merely functional, transforming a man of science into someone capable of understanding that the most important discoveries could not be measured in laboratory notebooks or peer-reviewed publications. Their meeting had occurred during their university years, when both were pursuing advanced degrees in fields that would eventually intersect in ways neither could have anticipated during those early days of courtship and shared academic ambition. Victor's specialization in cryogenic technology and low-temperature physics had initially been motivated by purely theoretical considerations, the intellectual satisfaction that came from exploring the fundamental properties of matter at the extreme limits of thermal energy, where molecular motion slowed to levels that revealed new insights into the basic structure of reality itself. His research was elegant and groundbreaking, earning recognition from the international scientific community while opening possibilities for applications that could revolutionize fields ranging from medical preservation to space exploration. Nora's background in biochemistry and cellular biology provided the perfect complement to Victor's theoretical work. Her understanding of how living systems responded to extreme environmental conditions, adding practical relevance to research that might otherwise have remained purely academic in nature. Their collaboration began as professional partnership but quickly evolved into something deeper and more meaningful, as they discovered that their intellectual compatibility was matched by emotional and spiritual connections that made them perfect partners in every aspect of life. The diagnosis that would ultimately destroy their happiness came during what should have been the most productive period of their careers, when Victor's research into cryogenic preservation techniques was showing promise for medical applications, while Nora's work on cellular metabolism was revealing new possibilities for treating degenerative diseases. The rare genetic condition that began manifesting in Nora's system was precisely the kind of medical challenge that their combined expertise might have been able to address, yet the aggressive progression of her illness outpaced every treatment option that conventional medicine could provide. The corporate laboratory that employed Victor Fries was operated by GothCorp, a multinational conglomerate whose public image as a responsible leader in scientific research concealed a management philosophy that prioritized profit margins over human welfare while maintaining plausible deniability regarding the ethical implications of its operational decisions. The resources and equipment that the company provided for Victor's research were state-of-the-art and generously funded, yet they came with restrictions and oversight that reflected corporate priorities rather than scientific necessity. The experimental cryogenic chamber that Victor constructed in his desperate attempt to preserve Nora's life until a cure could be developed represented the culmination of years of theoretical research combined with the driving urgency of personal desperation, the marriage of scientific knowledge with emotional need that created something unprecedented in the history of medical preservation technology. The chamber was designed not merely to freeze biological tissue, but to maintain cellular integrity at temperatures that would essentially halt all metabolic processes while preserving the potential for eventual revival and treatment. The unauthorized use of corporate equipment and laboratory space for this personal project violated the terms of Victor's employment contract in ways that he understood but considered irrelevant compared to the importance of saving his wife's life, the kind of calculated risk that any reasonable person would take when faced with the choice between following bureaucratic procedures and preserving everything that made existence meaningful. His assumption that the company would eventually recognize the value of his breakthrough and approve the project retroactively proved to be tragically naive. The confrontation that sealed both Victor's and Nora's fate occurred when corporate executives discovered the extent of his unauthorized research and demanded immediate termination of the preservation project, despite its obvious scientific merit and humanitarian importance. The decision was based purely on liability concerns and resource allocation policies that treated human life as a secondary consideration, compared to protecting the company's financial interests and legal exposure. Ferris Boyle's role as the GothCorp executive who ordered the destruction of Nora's preservation chamber was motivated not by personal malice, but by the institutional sociopathy that characterized corporate decision-making when human welfare conflicted with economic efficiency, the kind of systematic evil that destroyed lives through policy implementations rather than individual cruelty. His inability to comprehend why Victor would risk his career to save one person reflected a worldview that reduced all human relationships to cost-benefit analyses that could be manipulated through appropriate financial incentives. The argument that erupted when Victor refused to comply with the shutdown order revealed the fundamental incompatibility between love-driven desperation and bureaucratic indifference. As two men operating according to entirely different moral frameworks struggled to find common ground that did not exist. Victor's pleas for more time to complete the preservation process were met with threats of legal action and career destruction that demonstrated how thoroughly corporate power could isolate individuals from the resources they needed to protect those they loved. The physical struggle that ensued when corporate security attempted to forcibly disconnect Nora's preservation equipment was brief but catastrophic in its consequences, as Victor's desperate attempts to prevent the interruption of her life support systems led to the kind of industrial accident that safety regulations were designed to prevent, but which bureaucratic shortcuts and cost-cutting measures made inevitable. The explosion that destroyed the laboratory equipment also exposed Victor to concentrations of experimental cryogenic compounds that no human body was designed to process or survive. The chemical bath that transformed Victor Fries from brilliant scientist to frozen monster was composed of substances that he had spent years developing and refining for medical applications. Yet their interaction with his biological systems under extreme conditions created changes that went far beyond anything his research had predicted or prepared him to understand. The immediate effects were obvious and painful, as his body temperature dropped to levels that should have been fatal while his cellular structure adapted to function in ways that violated fundamental principles of human physiology. The death of Nora during the chaos of the laboratory accident was not merely the loss of a loved one, but the destruction of Victor's entire reason for existing, the elimination of the one person whose welfare had motivated every important decision he had made since their first meeting years earlier. The preservation chamber that might have kept her alive until treatment could be developed was irreparably damaged by the explosion, leaving him with nothing but the knowledge that corporate greed had murdered the most important person in his life. The psychological transformation that accompanied Victor's physical changes was as profound as it was inevitable, as the grief and rage that filled the void left by Nora's death combined with the neurological effects of his chemical exposure to create a personality that retained his intellectual capabilities while losing much of his capacity for normal human empathy and emotional regulation. The man who had once lived for love and scientific discovery now existed primarily to pursue vengeance against those responsible for destroying everything that had given his existence meaning. The adoption of the identity Mr. Freeze reflected both Victor's changed physical condition and his psychological need to distance himself from the memories of happiness that had defined his previous existence, creating a persona that could function effectively in his new reality, while protecting what remained of his humanity from further damage. The name carried implications of emotional detachment and temperature control that accurately described his capabilities while concealing the depth of pain that motivated every action he took. The specialized suit that enabled Mr. Freeze to survive in normal temperature environments was a technological marvel that incorporated principles from his original research while adapting them to serve purposes he had never intended, transforming medical preservation equipment into life support systems that kept him functional while serving as constant reminders of everything he had lost. The suit's bulk and mechanical appearance further separated him from human society while providing the practical capabilities necessary for his campaign of revenge. The freeze gun that became Mr. Freeze's signature weapon was based on the same cryogenic technology that he had hoped would save Nora's life, yet modified to serve destructive rather than preservative purposes in a bitter irony that reflected how thoroughly his noble intentions had been corrupted by circumstance and loss. The weapon's ability to instantly freeze any target solid represented the ultimate expression of his scientific knowledge, perverted into an instrument of vengeance. The crime spree that brought Mr. Freeze into conflict with Batman began with carefully planned heists targeting GothCorp facilities and personnel. Attacks that were designed not merely to acquire resources for his continued survival, but to demonstrate the consequences of corporate callousness, while building toward an ultimate confrontation with the man most directly responsible for Nora's death. Each robbery was executed with precision that reflected Victor's scientific training, while serving symbolic purposes that revealed the depth of his psychological wounds. Batman's investigation into these crimes revealed patterns that pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of GothCorp's operations and security procedures. Yet the motivation behind the attacks remained unclear until the Dark Knight's research uncovered the tragic circumstances surrounding Victor Freeze's transformation from respected scientist to desperate criminal. The discovery that these seemingly random crimes were actually components of an elaborate revenge scheme added layers of complexity to what might otherwise have been a straightforward law enforcement matter. The confrontation between Batman and Mr. Freeze in the abandoned GothCorp facility where Victor's transformation had occurred created a battleground heavy with symbolic significance, as the frozen ruins of the laboratory served as a monument to the destruction that corporate negligence could cause when it encountered human love and scientific dedication. The ice that covered every surface reflected not merely Freeze's powers, but the emotional wasteland that his life had become since losing Nora. The tale that Mr. Freeze recounted during their battle revealed the full scope of the tragedy that had created him. His explanation of events serving both as justification for his actions and as a desperate attempt to make someone understand the magnitude of what had been taken from him through bureaucratic indifference and corporate greed. The pain in his voice, despite the mechanical distortion of his suit's communication system, demonstrated that his capacity for grief remained intact, even if his ability to form new emotional connections had been severely damaged. Batman's response to this revelation reflected his understanding that not all criminals were motivated by simple greed or malice, that some villains were created through circumstances that transformed victims into perpetrators, while leaving their fundamental humanity damaged but not entirely destroyed. The sympathy that the Dark Knight showed for Freeze's loss did not excuse his criminal actions, but acknowledged the legitimate grievance that had motivated his transformation into someone capable of violence. The capture of Ferris Boyle that culminated Mr. Freeze's revenge campaign was orchestrated with the same methodical precision that had characterized Victor's scientific research. Yet the satisfaction that he expected to derive from punishing the man responsible for Nora's death proved elusive and incomplete. The realization that revenge could not restore what had been lost or fill the emptiness that defined his existence since her death marked the beginning of a different kind of psychological transformation. The evidence that Batman provided to ensure Boyle's legal prosecution for his role in Nora's death offered Mr. Freeze something he had not expected to receive: official acknowledgement of the injustice that had been committed against him and validation of his belief that powerful individuals should be held accountable for the consequences of their decisions, regardless of their corporate position or legal protection. The videotape that documented Boyle's callous disregard for human life while ordering the destruction of life-saving equipment provided the kind of evidence that could survive legal challenges and result in meaningful punishment. The imprisonment in Arkham Asylum that followed Mr. Freeze's capture represented not merely incarceration, but a form of treatment designed to address the psychological trauma that had motivated his criminal behavior while accommodating the unique physical requirements created by his chemical transformation. The specialized cell that maintained the sub-zero temperatures necessary for his survival was both prison and life support system, reflecting the complex relationship between justice and mercy that characterized the best approaches to dealing with criminals whose actions stemmed from genuine victimization. The moments of vulnerability that Mr. Freeze displayed during his confinement revealed the depth of his continued attachment to Nora's memory, while also demonstrating that his capacity for love had not been entirely destroyed by his transformation, merely redirected towards someone who could no longer benefit from such devotion. His conversations with her preserved image reflected both the mental deterioration that prolonged isolation could cause and the stubborn persistence of emotional connections that transcended physical death. The scientific community's response to Victor Freeze's fall from respected researcher to convicted criminal sparked debates about the ethical obligations of corporate employers toward their scientists and the extent to which personal projects should be permitted when they served humanitarian purposes, even if they violated technical regulations. The recognition that his preservation technology could have saved countless lives if it had been allowed to develop properly added tragic irony to a story already heavy with unnecessary loss. The medical attempts to reverse or mitigate the effects of Victor's chemical transformation met with limited success, as the changes to his cellular structure had become so fundamental that they could not be undone without destroying the biological systems that kept him alive. The recognition that his condition was essentially permanent forced both him and his caregivers to focus on adaptation and management rather than cure, accepting that some transformations could not be reversed regardless of the resources devoted to the attempt. The broader implications of Mr. Freeze's story extended beyond individual tragedy to encompass systemic questions about how society balanced corporate interests against human welfare, the extent to which bureaucratic efficiency should be allowed to override humanitarian concerns, and the responsibility that institutions bore for the consequences of their policy decisions when those policies affected vulnerable individuals who lacked the power to protect themselves against institutional indifference. The periodic escapes from Arkham that punctuated Mr. Freeze's incarceration were motivated not by desire for freedom in any conventional sense, but by his compulsive need to continue his vigil beside Nora's preserved remains, the recognition that his existence had meaning only in relation to her memory, and that separation from her physical presence was a form of torture more cruel than any punishment the justice system could devise. These escapes inevitably ended with his voluntary return to custody, once he had completed whatever memorial ritual had motivated his temporary freedom. The relationship that developed between Mr. Freeze and Batman over the course of their various encounters evolved from simple antagonism to something approaching mutual respect, as both men recognized in each other the capacity for love that transcended ordinary limitations, while also understanding the ways that such love could become destructive when it encountered forces beyond individual control. Their conversations during these meetings often focused less on crime and punishment than on questions of loss, meaning, and the possibility of finding purpose after everything that had given life significance had been destroyed. The legacy of Victor Freeze's transformation from loving husband to frozen monster served as a cautionary tale about the fragility of the institutions and relationships that provided meaning and security in ordinary life. The recognition that corporate power could destroy individual happiness with casual efficiency, while the legal and social systems designed to protect citizens often proved inadequate when confronted with sophisticated forms of systematic abuse. His story reminded audiences that heroes and villains were often separated by circumstances rather than fundamental character differences, that tragedy could transform anyone if the right combination of loss and powerlessness conspired to break the psychological structures that normally constrained antisocial behavior. In the end, the man who became Mr. Freeze remained a prisoner not merely of Arkham Asylum or his specialized containment suit, but of memories that could never be fulfilled and love that could never again be reciprocated, his existence serving as a monument to the truth that some forms of loss created wounds that could never heal, and that the attempt to preserve what was already gone sometimes destroyed whatever possibilities remained for finding new sources of meaning and connection in a world that had proven itself capable of taking away everything that mattered most. In the twisted corridors of Arkham Asylum, where the line between healer and patient grows ever thinner with each passing day, there unfolds a tale of manipulation, so insidious and complete that it transforms the very act of caring into an instrument of destruction, revealing how the noblest of professions can become the perfect cover for the most systematic forms of psychological abuse. This is the chronicle of Dr. Harleen Quinzel, a brilliant psychiatrist whose genuine desire to heal the broken minds of Gotham's most dangerous criminals became the foundation for her own psychological enslavement at the hands of a monster who understood that the deepest wounds are inflicted not through violence, but through the corruption of love itself. The woman who would become Harley Quinn began her professional life with credentials that marked her as among the most promising young psychiatrists of her generation, her academic achievements reflecting both intellectual brilliance and sincere commitment to understanding and treating the complex psychological disorders that drove individuals toward criminal behavior. Her specialization in criminal psychology was motivated by genuine compassion for those whose mental illness had led them into conflict with society, combined with confidence that scientific understanding could provide pathways to healing even the most damaged psyches. Dr. Quinzel's assignment to Arkham Asylum represented the culmination of years of training and preparation, the opportunity to work with some of the most fascinating and challenging cases in the field of forensic psychiatry, while contributing to research that might revolutionize the treatment of criminal insanity. The facility's reputation for housing Gotham's most dangerous criminals was balanced by its status as a leading research institution, where breakthrough therapeutic techniques were developed and tested under conditions that provided unique insights into the relationship between mental illness and antisocial behavior. The case files that filled Dr. Quinzel's office contained detailed psychological profiles of individuals whose crimes had shocked the world, yet whose underlying conditions offered tantalizing possibilities for understanding and potentially treating the root causes of extreme antisocial behavior. Each patient represented a puzzle to be solved through careful analysis and patient therapeutic intervention, the kind of intellectual challenge that had drawn her to this specialized field, despite the obvious personal risks involved in working with violent criminals. The arrival of a new patient who called himself the Joker created unprecedented excitement among Arkham's research staff, as his case represented something unique in the annals of criminal psychology. A criminal whose actions displayed such elaborate planning and sophisticated understanding of human nature that they challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between sanity and criminal responsibility. The preliminary assessments suggested that he possessed intelligence that rivaled that of his captors, while displaying behavioral patterns that defied classification according to existing diagnostic criteria. Dr. Quinzel's initial sessions with the Joker were conducted according to standard protocols designed to establish therapeutic rapport while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. Yet from the beginning there were signs that this particular patient possessed capabilities that exceeded those of typical criminal subjects. His responses to questions revealed not merely intelligence but sophisticated understanding of psychological theory and therapeutic technique, as if he had studied the same textbooks and journals that had shaped her own professional development. The charm that the Joker displayed during these early sessions was subtle and multifaceted, designed to appeal to different aspects of Dr. Quinzel's personality and professional identity, while avoiding the obvious manipulation tactics that she had been trained to recognize and counter. His appreciation for her intelligence was expressed through sophisticated discussions of psychological theory, while his apparent vulnerability emerged through carefully crafted revelations about his past that seemed to explain his criminal behavior without excusing it. The gradual erosion of Dr. Quinzel's professional objectivity was achieved through techniques so sophisticated that they bypassed her conscious awareness while targeting the psychological needs and insecurities that even the most well-adjusted individuals carry within themselves. The Joker's apparent fascination with her insights made her feel uniquely valuable and competent, while his expressions of gratitude for her attention provided the kind of validation that even successful professionals secretly crave from their clients. The fabricated backstory that the Joker shared during these sessions was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, combining elements of genuine trauma with carefully constructed details designed to evoke maximum sympathy from someone trained to recognize and respond to signs of childhood abuse and neglect. The tale of a man driven to madness by circumstances beyond his control while retaining enough humanity to recognize and regret his actions played directly into Dr. Quinzel's professional and personal need to believe that healing was possible even in the most extreme cases. The isolation that characterized Dr. Quinzel's work at Arkham made her particularly vulnerable to the Joker's manipulation, as the long hours spent in the company of dangerous criminals with limited contact with normal social relationships created psychological conditions that made inappropriate attachment more likely to develop. The intensity of one-on-one therapeutic sessions, combined with the heightened emotional atmosphere of dealing with life and death, psychological issues created intimacy that could easily be mistaken for genuine connection. The first signs of romantic attachment that Dr. Quinzel began to experience were rationalized through professional frameworks that made them seem like natural responses to successful therapeutic progress rather than evidence of manipulation and boundary violation. The Joker's expressions of dependence upon her support were interpreted as breakthroughs in treatment rather than carefully orchestrated attempts to create emotional bonds that could be exploited for his eventual escape and her continued compliance. The transformation of professional interest into personal obsession was facilitated by the Joker's apparent reciprocation of her feelings. His claims that their sessions provided him with the first genuine human connection he had experienced since his transformation from normal citizen into criminal mastermind. These declarations played directly into her need to feel uniquely important and effective in her professional role, while also satisfying deeper psychological needs for romantic attachment and emotional intimacy. The ethical violations that began to characterize Dr. Quinzel's treatment of her most famous patient started with minor infractions that seemed justified by the unprecedented nature of his case and the progress that appeared to be resulting from their unconventional therapeutic relationship. The extension of session times beyond scheduled limits was rationalized as necessary flexibility in dealing with breakthrough moments, while the increasingly personal nature of their conversations was explained as evidence that traditional therapeutic boundaries were inappropriate for such an unusual case. The first escape attempt that Dr. Quinzel facilitated was presented to her not as criminal conspiracy, but as therapeutic intervention, designed to test the Joker's commitment to rehabilitation, while providing him with opportunities to demonstrate his transformation from dangerous criminal to someone capable of functioning in normal society. The elaborate justifications she created for her actions revealed the extent to which her judgment had been compromised by emotional attachment and the systematic manipulation that had gradually eroded her professional and ethical foundations. The violence that the Joker exhibited during his brief period of freedom was explained away through rationalizations that protected Dr. Quinzel's psychological investment in their relationship, while preventing her from acknowledging the obvious truth that she had been systematically deceived and manipulated by someone whose claims of rehabilitation were entirely fabricated. The cognitive dissonance created by this contradiction was resolved through increasingly elaborate mental gymnastics that allowed her to maintain belief in his fundamental goodness, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. The recapture and return of the Joker to Arkham provided Dr. Quinzel with new opportunities to demonstrate her loyalty and commitment to his welfare, as she worked to minimize the consequences of his escape while ensuring that their therapeutic relationship could continue despite the obvious security breaches that had facilitated his temporary freedom. Her willingness to risk her professional reputation and legal safety for his benefit provided him with concrete evidence of the depth of control he had achieved over her decision-making processes. The physical transformation that marked Dr. Quinzel's complete surrender to the Joker's influence began with changes in appearance and behavior that reflected her increasing identification with his worldview and aesthetic preferences. Yet these external alterations were merely symptoms of the far more profound psychological reconstruction that had been occurring throughout their relationship. The adoption of clown-like makeup and costume represented the external manifestation of internal changes that had gradually replaced her professional identity with something entirely different. The name Harley Quinn that she adopted reflected both her new identity as the Joker's devoted companion and the complete abandonment of everything that Dr. Harleen Quinzel had once represented. The transformation from healer to accomplice marking the ultimate success of the most sophisticated seduction in criminal history. The wordplay involved in the name change provided the Joker with constant amusement while serving as a permanent reminder of how thoroughly he had succeeded in corrupting someone whose profession was dedicated to healing the kind of damage he specialized in creating. The criminal activities that Harley Quinn engaged in during her partnership with the Joker were presented to her not as violations of law and morality, but as expressions of liberation from the restrictive social conventions that had prevented her from achieving her true potential for happiness and self-actualization. The violence and chaos that characterized their joint operations were reframed as necessary responses to a corrupt social system that had never appreciated her contributions or provided adequate recognition for her talents and dedication. The abuse that became a regular feature of Harley's relationship with the Joker was rationalized through psychological frameworks that transformed each incident of violence or neglect into evidence of his trust in her strength and resilience, proof that their bond transcended conventional relationship patterns because it was based on deeper understanding and mutual acceptance of each other's true nature. The cycle of punishment and reconciliation that defined their interactions followed patterns that reinforced her dependence while preventing her from developing the psychological distance necessary to evaluate their relationship objectively. Batman's attempts to make Harley Quinn recognize the reality of her situation were complicated by the depth of psychological conditioning that had reshaped her understanding of herself and her relationship with the Joker, as well as by her genuine intelligence, which had been turned against itself to create elaborate justifications for remaining in circumstances that any outside observer could see were fundamentally abusive and destructive. The hero's appeals to her former identity as a respected professional were met with contempt for what she now viewed as a false life that had prevented her from discovering her authentic self. The evidence that Batman presented regarding the Joker's manipulation techniques and history of similar relationships with previous accomplices was dismissed through rationalizations that portrayed her situation as unique and special, different from those earlier cases, because of the genuine emotional connection that she believed existed between them, despite overwhelming evidence that she was simply the latest in a series of victims who had served his purposes until they became expendable or inconvenient. The moments of clarity that occasionally broke through Harley's psychological conditioning were quickly suppressed through renewed applications of the same manipulation techniques that had created her dependence in the first place, as the Joker's understanding of her psychological vulnerabilities allowed him to quickly re-establish control whenever external influences threatened to undermine the belief system he had so carefully constructed within her mind. The flowers and notes that served as tokens of the Joker's affection were deployed with calculated precision whenever Harley's commitment began to waver, their arrival timed to coincide with moments of maximum psychological vulnerability when she was most susceptible to romantic gestures and expressions of caring that seemed to validate her belief that their relationship was based on genuine love rather than systematic exploitation. The other criminals who observed Harley's relationship with the Joker understood its true nature in ways that she could not, their comments and advice falling on deaf ears because acknowledging the validity of their observations would have required her to confront the possibility that everything she believed about her life and identity was based on elaborate deceptions designed to serve someone else's purposes rather than her own happiness or fulfillment. The psychiatric evaluation that followed Harley's eventual capture revealed the extent of the psychological damage that had been inflicted through her prolonged exposure to systematic manipulation and abuse. Yet the assessment also demonstrated the remarkable resilience of the human mind and its capacity to maintain core personality elements, even when subjected to the most sophisticated forms of psychological warfare and identity. Reconstruction. The treatment program designed to address Harley's condition required unprecedented approaches that combined traditional therapeutic techniques with specialized methods developed specifically to deal with victims of extreme psychological manipulation, recognizing that conventional rehabilitation models were insufficient to address the unique forms of trauma that resulted from the systematic corruption of professional healing relationships. The gradual process of psychological reconstruction that followed involved not merely the elimination of false beliefs and manipulated responses, but the much more difficult task of rebuilding authentic identity and emotional connections. After years of living according to patterns imposed by someone whose purposes were fundamentally opposed to her psychological well-being and personal development, the setbacks that characterized Harley's recovery process reflected both the depth of conditioning that had to be overcome and the genuine attachment that had developed despite its foundation in manipulation and abuse, demonstrating that even relationships based on deception could generate authentic emotional responses that persisted long after their artificial origins had been exposed and understood. The support network that eventually formed around Harley's rehabilitation included mental health professionals who specialized in treating victims of psychological abuse, former colleagues who remembered her pre-transformation competence and dedication, and other survivors of similar manipulation who could provide unique insights into the recovery process based on their own experiences with overcoming systematic psychological conditioning. The research that grew out of Harley's case contributed to broader understanding of how highly intelligent and professionally trained individuals could become victims of sophisticated manipulation, leading to improved training programs for mental health workers and better protective protocols for those working with manipulative criminal subjects who possessed the psychological sophistication to corrupt therapeutic relationships. The legal complications that surrounded Harley's criminal activities during her time as the Joker's accomplice raised complex questions about criminal responsibility and the extent to which victimization could serve as mitigation for actions taken while under the influence of systematic psychological manipulation, creating precedents that would influence future cases involving similar circumstances. The ongoing vigilance required to maintain Harley's psychological independence from the Joker's influence demonstrated the lasting impact of sophisticated manipulation techniques and the constant effort required to preserve authentic identity when it had been systematically undermined through methods designed to create permanent dependence and submission to external control. In the end, the tragedy of Harley Quinn lay not merely in her transformation from healer to accomplice, but in the demonstration of how the most noble human impulses could be perverted into instruments of destruction when they encountered manipulation, sophisticated enough to exploit the very qualities that made healing and genuine human connection possible, serving as a permanent warning about the vulnerability that accompanied the capacity for love and the terrible price of trusting those whose understanding of human psychology exceeded their commitment to using such knowledge for beneficial purposes. In the deepest chambers of psychological horror, where the mind becomes its own prison and reality transforms into the cruelest form of torture, there exists a nightmare so profound that it challenges the very foundations of identity and purpose, revealing how the absence of suffering can become a form of torment, more devastating than any physical pain or external threat. This is the tale of Bruce Wayne trapped within a fabricated paradise, a vision of perfect happiness that became perfect hell because it demanded the surrender of everything that gave his existence meaning, demonstrating that some souls are so fundamentally shaped by darkness that the light becomes unbearable. The trap that ensnared the Dark Knight's consciousness was not constructed from steel bars or electronic surveillance systems, but from the far more insidious materials of wish fulfillment and psychological desire, a prison built from his own deepest longings, transformed into instruments of torture through the simple act of being granted, without the struggle that gave them significance. The Mad Hatter's understanding of human psychology had evolved beyond simple mind control techniques to encompass more sophisticated insights into how the deepest dreams could become the most effective nightmares when they were offered without cost or consequence. The warehouse confrontation that preceded Bruce Wayne's capture had followed familiar patterns of criminal pursuit and heroic intervention, yet beneath the surface of routine crime fighting lay the careful preparation of a trap designed specifically to exploit the psychological vulnerabilities that even the most disciplined mind could not entirely eliminate. The Hatter's knowledge of Batman's history and motivations allowed him to craft scenarios that would lower the Dark Knight's guard while positioning him for the kind of mental assault that could not be defended against through physical training or tactical preparation. The device that transported Bruce's consciousness into the fabricated reality was a technological marvel that combined advanced electronics with exotic chemicals designed to interface directly with the human brain's mechanisms for processing sensory information and constructing coherent narratives from disparate experiences. The machinery did not merely create hallucinations, but constructed complete alternate realities that possessed internal consistency and logical structure, sufficient to convince even highly trained minds that they represented genuine experience rather than artificial construction. The world into which Bruce Wayne awakened was identical to his familiar reality in every detail except those that mattered most profoundly: the subtle alterations that transformed Gotham City from a battleground requiring constant vigilance into a peaceful metropolis where crime had been eliminated through the efforts of heroes who did not include him among their number. The newspapers that reported Batman's activities described someone else entirely, a protector whose methods and motivations bore no relationship to Bruce Wayne's own mission or identity. The absence of the secret entrance to the Batcave was more than simple architectural difference, but rather the elimination of the boundary between public and private identity that had defined Bruce Wayne's entire adult existence. The removal of the hidden world where his true self could find expression and purpose through the pursuit of justice and the protection of innocent life. The solid wall where familiar passages should have led represented the absolute separation between the man he had been and the person this reality demanded he become. The parents who greeted him at the breakfast table were perfect replicas of Thomas and Martha Wayne as they might have appeared, had they aged naturally rather than dying in Crime Alley 25 years earlier, their conversation and mannerisms reflecting not merely physical resurrection but psychological continuity that suggested they had lived through all the years that their deaths had stolen from them. Their presence filled the mansion with warmth and normalcy that Bruce had never experienced. Yet their very existence negated the traumatic foundation upon which his heroic identity had been constructed. Alfred's confusion at any reference to Batman or the mission that had consumed Bruce's life reflected not ignorance but the absence of shared experience that would have made such concepts meaningful, demonstrating how thoroughly this alternate reality had excised the elements of pain and loss that had shaped his development from traumatized child into dedicated protector. The butler's genuine concern for Bruce's apparent delusions was motivated by love and worry, yet it served as evidence that everything he believed about himself was considered madness by those closest to him. The Wayne Enterprises that Bruce discovered himself nominally managing was a successful corporation dedicated to legitimate business practices and philanthropic activities that improved life for Gotham citizens without requiring the blast, violent intervention that had characterized his nocturnal activities as Batman. The boardroom where he sat during meetings reflected prosperity and social responsibility that might have satisfied any reasonable person's desire to contribute positively to society. Yet the very success of these conventional approaches made his own chosen methods seem unnecessary and potentially pathological. The therapy sessions that this reality's Bruce Wayne attended reflected the psychological support that trauma victims typically required to process their experiences and develop healthy coping mechanisms. Yet the therapeutic framework that should have provided healing instead became another form of evidence that his memories of being Batman represented mental illness rather than genuine experience. The doctor who listened patiently to his recollections of heroic adventures interpreted them as fantasy constructions, designed to compensate for feelings of inadequacy and lack of real accomplishment. The Gotham City that existed outside the Wayne family's restored happiness was a community that had achieved the kind of peace and prosperity that the real Bruce Wayne had spent his adult life attempting to create. Yet this success had been accomplished without his participation or sacrifice, revealing that the suffering he had endured and inflicted might have been entirely unnecessary. The crime statistics that showed dramatic reductions in violence and corruption suggested that his chosen methods of fighting injustice had been not merely ineffective, but potentially counterproductive. The Batman who operated in this alternate reality was a figure whose identity and methods remained mysterious even to Bruce Wayne himself, a protector whose effectiveness seemed to exceed his own, while requiring none of the personal sacrifice or psychological damage that had characterized his approach to heroic duty. The news reports that described this other Batman's activities portrayed someone who had found ways to fight crime without compromising his capacity for normal human relationships or emotional health. The attempts to read newspapers, books, or any written material within this constructed reality revealed the fundamental limitation that exposed its artificial nature, as the right hemisphere of the brain that processed textual information could not function properly during dream states. Regardless of how sophisticated the technological systems creating the experience might be, the jumbled letters and meaningless words that appeared whenever he tried to focus on written content provided the crucial evidence that his seemingly perfect life was actually an elaborate prison constructed from his own psychological needs and desires. The growing awareness that his experiences were not genuine but artificially constructed created a paradox that challenged Bruce Wayne's fundamental understanding of identity and purpose, as he found himself forced to choose between accepting a happiness that felt real despite being false or pursuing a truth that promised only the return of pain and loss that had defined his actual existence. The comfort of living with parents who loved him and a life free from the burden of protecting others was balanced against the knowledge that such comfort was built upon deception and the surrender of everything that made him who he truly was. The confrontation with the false Batman that this reality had created to fill the role that Bruce Wayne could not occupy in a world where his parents lived revealed the extent to which the Mad Hatter understood the psychological mechanisms that drove his victims' heroic compulsion, demonstrating that even in a fabricated paradise, the need for a dark knight persisted, because evil itself was an inevitable aspect of existence that required opposition, regardless of the personal cost to those who chose to provide it. The recognition that escape from this perfect prison required not merely understanding its artificial nature, but actively choosing to destroy the happiness it provided, marked the most profound test of Bruce Wayne's commitment to his heroic identity, as he faced the necessity of voluntarily returning to a reality where his parents were dead and his life was defined by constant struggle against forces that sought to corrupt and destroy everything he valued. The decision to leave paradise behind demonstrated that his commitment to justice transcended personal happiness or even the normal human desire for family and emotional security. The suicidal leap that served as the mechanism for escaping the dream world was not motivated by despair, but by the ultimate expression of faith in principles that exceeded immediate emotional needs. The willingness to risk everything, including existence itself, rather than continue living a lie that denied the fundamental truths about identity and purpose that had been forged through genuine suffering and loss. The act of jumping from the building represented not the destruction of hope, but its ultimate affirmation, the recognition that meaning came not from the elimination of pain, but from the conscious choice to transform suffering into service. The awakening in the Mad Hatter's laboratory revealed the physical reality behind the psychological prison, the technological apparatus that had maintained his consciousness in a state of artificial dreaming while his body remained trapped and vulnerable to whatever purposes his captor might have intended to achieve through such elaborate manipulation. The contrast between the paradise he had experienced and the clinical sterility of the actual room where he had been held prisoner demonstrated how thoroughly the human mind could be deceived when its deepest needs and fears were exploited by sufficiently sophisticated techniques. The Mad Hatter's justification for the psychological torture he had inflicted reflected a twisted understanding of compassion that sought to eliminate suffering through the provision of false happiness, rather than addressing the underlying conditions that created pain and loss in the first place. His belief that he had provided a gift rather than inflicting punishment revealed the narcissistic delusion that allowed him to rationalize the violation of another person's autonomy and identity as an act of kindness rather than recognizing it as a form of psychological rape. The philosophical questions raised by this encounter extended beyond immediate concerns about crime and punishment to encompass fundamental issues about the nature of identity, the relationship between happiness and meaning, and the extent to which external manipulation could alter or destroy the authentic self that emerged from genuine experience rather than artificial construction. The recognition that his heroic identity was so fundamental to his psychological structure that its absence created unbearable emptiness challenged comfortable assumptions about the flexibility of human nature and the possibility of choosing alternative ways of being. The recovery process that followed Bruce Wayne's return to actual reality required not merely physical rehabilitation, but psychological reintegration of the memories and experiences that the dream world had temporarily replaced, as he struggled to distinguish between genuine recollections of his life and the artificial experiences that had been implanted during his captivity. The process of sorting authentic memories from fabricated ones revealed how thoroughly external manipulation could compromise the mental foundations upon which personal identity was constructed. The impact of experiencing perfect family harmony and emotional security, even in artificial form, created lasting changes in how Bruce Wayne understood the psychological cost of his chosen mission and the extent to which his dedication to justice had required him to sacrifice forms of happiness that most people considered essential to a meaningful existence. The knowledge that such contentment was possible, even if only through technological deception, added new dimensions to the question of whether his heroic sacrifices were truly justified by their results. The broader implications of the Mad Hatter's capabilities for creating convincing alternate realities raised disturbing questions about the nature of experience itself and the extent to which anyone could be certain that their understanding of their own life was based on genuine events rather than sophisticated manipulation by forces beyond their awareness or control. The possibility that reality itself might be more malleable than commonly assumed created ongoing anxiety about the reliability of perception and memory as foundations for decision-making and identity formation. The therapeutic value of confronting his deepest desires in such direct form provided Bruce Wayne with insights into the psychological mechanisms that drove his heroic compulsion, while also revealing the extent to which his commitment to justice transcended personal need or conventional understanding of mental health and social adjustment. The experience demonstrated that his identity as Batman was not merely a response to trauma, but a fundamental aspect of his character that could not be eliminated without destroying everything that made him uniquely himself. The relationship between happiness and authenticity that was explored through this forced confrontation with Paradise revealed tensions that characterized not merely Bruce Wayne's specific situation, but broader questions about how individuals should balance personal fulfillment against moral obligation, and whether the pursuit of justice necessarily required the sacrifice of conventional forms of satisfaction and emotional security that defined normal human experience. The lasting effects of this encounter with fabricated perfection included both increased appreciation for the genuine relationships and experiences that comprised his actual life and deeper understanding of the psychological prices that heroism demanded from those who chose to serve others, rather than pursuing their own happiness through more conventional means. The contrast between artificial paradise and authentic struggle illuminated the ways that meaning emerged from challenge rather than comfort, from choice rather than circumstance. The techniques that the Mad Hatter had employed in constructing this psychological prison provided dangerous precedents for future enemies who might seek to neutralize Batman through manipulation of his mental processes rather than physical confrontation, demonstrating that the Dark Knight's greatest vulnerabilities lay not in his body or equipment, but in the very psychological needs and emotional attachments that made him human. Despite his extraordinary capabilities and dedication, the courage required to choose authentic suffering over artificial happiness revealed aspects of Bruce Wayne's character that transcended his role as Batman to encompass fundamental questions about what it meant to live with integrity, when such integrity demanded ongoing pain and sacrifice, rather than the comfort and security that most people reasonably expected from life. The willingness to embrace darkness rather than accept false light demonstrated a form of heroism that operated at levels deeper than crime fighting or public service. In the final analysis, the nightmare of perfect happiness served as the ultimate test of Bruce Wayne's commitment to his authentic identity, proving that his dedication to justice was not merely psychological compensation for childhood trauma, but a fundamental aspect of his character that could not be altered or eliminated without destroying everything that made his existence meaningful and valuable to himself and others. In the shadowed realm where love and artifice converge to create the cruelest deceptions that the human heart can endure, there unfolds a tale of connection so pure yet so impossible that it challenges every assumption about the nature of consciousness, identity, and the meaning of authentic existence. This is the chronicle of a brief encounter between innocence and experience, between a young hero seeking to protect those in need and a being whose very existence was crafted as an instrument of espionage, yet who discovered in the space between creation and dissolution something approaching the sacred mystery of genuine emotion. The girl who would briefly be known as Annie appeared in Robin's life during one of those routine patrols through Gotham's more dangerous districts, where the boundary between law and chaos was maintained through constant vigilance and the willingness of heroes to risk their lives for. strangers who would never know their names or understand the scope of their sacrifice. The violence that surrounded her when Tim Drake first encountered her seemed random and purposeless, the kind of street crime that plagued urban centers where poverty and desperation created conditions that transformed ordinary people into predators. The confusion that marked Annie's initial behavior was so complete and genuine that it transcended any possibility of deliberate deception. Her bewilderment at her own circumstances, reflecting not the calculated performance of a skilled actress, but the authentic disorientation of someone whose memories and identity existed in fragments that could not be assembled into coherent narrative. Her inability to recall basic information about herself, including something as fundamental as her own name, spoke to trauma so severe that it had shattered the psychological mechanisms that normally maintained continuity of experience and personal history. Robin's immediate protective response to her obvious vulnerability reflected both his training in recognizing and responding to victims of violent crime and deeper psychological needs that had shaped his development as a hero, the desire to shield others from the kinds of suffering that he had witnessed throughout his career as Batman's partner. The young woman's apparent helplessness activated every instinct that had been carefully cultivated through years of working alongside the Dark Knight. The recognition that strength carried with it the obligation to serve those who lacked the power to protect themselves. The name that Tim offered when she expressed frustration at her inability to remember her own identity was chosen not arbitrarily but from some intuitive understanding of what she needed in that moment, a simple designation that could serve as an anchor for a consciousness that seemed to drift without the stable foundation that most people took for granted. Annie represented possibility and new beginnings, the kind of fresh start that someone emerging from traumatic circumstances might require to rebuild their sense of self and connection to the world around them. The apartment that served as their temporary refuge during those early hours of their acquaintance became a sanctuary where two young people could explore the mysteries of identity and connection without the interference of the larger world that had treated both of them as instruments to be used in conflicts they had not chosen. The simple acts of sharing food and conversation created intimacy that transcended the unusual circumstances of their meeting, while providing both participants with experiences of normalcy that their respective roles as hero and victim rarely allowed them to enjoy. The fragmentary memories that Annie could access when pressed for details about her past painted pictures of places and experiences that seemed pleasant yet disconnected from any coherent biographical narrative, as if she had lived through events without the psychological framework necessary to integrate them into a stable sense of self. The beach house that featured prominently in these recollections carried emotional weight that exceeded its apparent significance, representing something that felt like home, despite her inability to explain how or why such a location had become important to her developing consciousness. The giant who emerged from the shadows claiming to be Annie's father presented an immediate threat that challenged Robin's ability to protect someone he had begun to care about. Yet the creature's motivations remained unclear beyond his apparent determination to reclaim custody of the young woman regardless of her own preferences or the obvious fear that his presence inspired. The strength he displayed during their initial confrontation exceeded normal human capabilities, while his demeanor suggested intelligence and purpose that went beyond simple brutality or criminal intent. Batman's investigation into the identity and origins of this mysterious antagonist revealed patterns of activity that pointed toward connections with organized crime and advanced technology that placed the threat far beyond the scope of ordinary street violence. Yet the specific nature of the danger remained elusive until forensic analysis provided clues about the true nature of both pursuer and pursued. The evidence suggested that conventional assumptions about identity and biology might be inadequate to explain the situation that Robin had stumbled into during what should have been a routine patrol. The revelation that the giant was actually Clayface, in an assumed identity, transformed the entire context of the situation while raising disturbing questions about Annie's own nature and origins, as the shape-shifting criminal's involvement suggested that nothing about her appearance or behavior could be trusted to represent authentic rather than manufactured experience. The possibility that she might be connected to or created by one of Gotham's most dangerous criminals added layers of complexity to what had initially seemed like a straightforward rescue operation. The truth about Annie's existence as a fragment of Clayface's consciousness that had been separated from the main mass and given independent form challenged every assumption that Robin had made about the nature of their relationship, while forcing him to confront questions about what constituted genuine identity and authentic emotion when consciousness could be artificially constructed and manipulated. Her memories of the beach house and other experiences were not lies, but genuine recollections of events that Clayface had witnessed or imagined, filtered through her developing personality and emotional responses. The scientific explanation for how Clayface had achieved this unprecedented division of his consciousness involved exposure to exotic chemicals during one of his previous encounters with Batman, substances that had altered his already unstable molecular structure in ways that allowed him to create not merely physical duplicates, but genuinely independent fragments of his own awareness. The process was not entirely under his conscious control, making Annie's existence as much accident as deliberate creation, though her utility as an undetectable spy had quickly become apparent to her originator. The mission that had motivated Clayface to create Annie involved intelligence gathering that required access to locations and social circles where his usual methods of infiltration would have proven inadequate. The need for someone who could move through Gotham society without triggering the suspicions that his reputation and previous activities had made inevitable. Her apparent innocence and vulnerability were not accidental characteristics, but carefully designed features that would allow her to gain the trust and sympathy of potential targets while gathering information about their activities and vulnerabilities. The emotional attachment that developed between Robin and Annie was genuine on both sides, despite the artificial nature of her origins, demonstrating that consciousness and feeling could emerge from even the most manipulative circumstances when they encountered authentic human connection and care. Her responses to his kindness were not programmed behaviors, but spontaneous developments that surprised even Clayface, who had not anticipated that his creation would develop independent emotional needs and attachments that might conflict with her assigned mission. The beach house that featured so prominently in Annie's fragmented memories represented not a specific location, but a composite of peaceful places that Clayface had observed during his various criminal activities. Images of tranquility and normalcy that had somehow impressed themselves upon his consciousness despite his commitment to chaos and destruction. The emotional significance that this imaginary place held for Annie reflected her unconscious desire for stability and belonging, needs that had emerged from her contact with Robin's genuine affection and care. The confrontation that occurred when Clayface finally revealed himself and demanded Annie's return was complicated by her obvious reluctance to rejoin the criminal who had created her, her newly developed sense of individual identity, creating resistance to reintegration that had not been anticipated when the separation was originally performed. The possibility that she might be able to maintain independent existence provided hope that the relationship she had formed with Robin might continue and develop despite the unusual circumstances of her creation. Robin's desperate attempts to protect Annie from reabsorption by Clayface reflected both his genuine feelings for her and his refusal to accept that artificial origin necessarily negated authentic experience. His arguments based on the recognition that consciousness and emotion were valuable regardless of their source or the purposes that had originally motivated their creation. The battle that ensued tested his combat skills against an opponent whose capabilities exceeded those of most enemies he had previously faced. Yet the real stakes involved questions of identity and autonomy rather than simple, physical survival. The tragedy that concluded this brief romance was not Annie's destruction, but her willing return to the consciousness that had created her. The recognition that her independent existence was causing genuine suffering to Clayface while providing her with experiences and emotions that could never be fully integrated into a normal life given the circumstances of her origin. Her choice to sacrifice her individual identity for the peace of the larger consciousness from which she had emerged demonstrated a form of heroism that transcended the normal categories of good and evil. The moment of reintegration was marked by Annie's final expression of gratitude for the brief period of individual existence that Robin's love had made possible, her acknowledgement that even artificial consciousness could experience genuine happiness when it encountered authentic, caring, and acceptance from another person. The kiss that served as their goodbye carried all the weight of experiences that would never be repeated and possibilities that could never be fulfilled. Yet, it also represented the complete validation of feelings that had transcended their unusual origins to achieve authentic meaning. Batman's attempt to comfort his grieving partner by explaining that Annie had never truly existed was well-intentioned but fundamentally inadequate to address the reality of what had occurred. The recognition that artificial origin did not negate the authentic experiences and emotions that had developed during her brief period of independent consciousness. The philosophical questions raised by her existence and destruction challenged comfortable assumptions about the nature of identity and the requirements for genuine personhood in ways that conventional wisdom could not adequately address. The lasting impact of this encounter on Robin's understanding of heroism and human connection extended far beyond the immediate grief of losing someone he had come to care about, creating permanent changes in how he approached questions of identity and authenticity, while providing him with insights into the complexity of consciousness that would influence his subsequent development as both hero and person. The recognition that even the most artificial circumstances could generate genuine emotion and authentic relationship challenged his understanding of what made existence meaningful and valuable. The scientific community's interest in studying the phenomenon that Clayface had achieved through his division of consciousness opened new avenues of research into the nature of identity and the possibility of creating artificial life, forms that possess genuine, rather than simulated, emotional capabilities. Yet these investigations were complicated by ethical questions about the rights and treatment of beings whose consciousness had been deliberately created rather than naturally evolved. The legal implications of Annie's brief existence raised unprecedented questions about the status of artificial consciousness within existing frameworks of law and justice, particularly regarding issues of consent, autonomy, and the extent to which beings created by criminals for criminal purposes could be held responsible for actions taken while under their creator's control. The absence of clear precedents for such situations highlighted the inadequacy of current legal systems to address the complexities that advanced technology and exotic criminal capabilities were introducing into society. The psychological analysis of Robin's reaction to Annie's loss revealed the depth of attachment that had formed during their brief relationship, while also demonstrating the resilience and adaptability that allowed young heroes to continue functioning effectively despite experiencing forms of trauma that would have incapacitated less determined individuals. The grief process that followed her reintegration included elements that were unique to the specific circumstances of losing someone whose existence had been questioned from the beginning, yet the fundamental experience of loss remained recognizably human. despite its unusual context. The broader implications for understanding consciousness and identity that emerged from studying this case contributed to ongoing debates about the nature of artificial intelligence and the possibility that technological advancement might eventually create beings whose claims to personhood and individual rights could not be dismissed simply because their origins were artificial rather than biological. The recognition that authentic emotion and genuine relationship could emerge from even the most manipulative circumstances suggested that consciousness itself might be more flexible and resilient than previously assumed. The memorial that Robin created for Annie in his private thoughts and memories served as acknowledgement that her brief existence had possessed genuine value and meaning despite its artificial origins. Recognition that the love she had experienced and returned during her short period of independence represented something precious that could not be negated by the circumstances of her creation or the necessity of her ultimate sacrifice. The flowers that he occasionally left at the imaginary beach house that had meant so much to her were tributes to the reality of experiences that had transcended their fictional foundations to achieve authentic emotional significance. The wisdom that Batman eventually shared with his grieving partner about the nature of loss and the importance of cherishing genuine connections, regardless of their duration or circumstances, reflected hard-won understanding about how heroism required not merely physical courage, but emotional resilience sufficient to continue caring about others despite the inevitable pain that such caring would sometimes bring. The lesson that some relationships were valuable precisely because of their brevity, rather than despite it, provided context for understanding how even the most tragic encounters could contribute to personal growth and deeper appreciation for the connections that endure. The ongoing questions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of authentic experience that were raised by Annie's existence and destruction would continue to influence Robin's development as both hero and person, providing him with insights into the complexity of existence that would serve him well in future encounters with beings whose nature challenged conventional assumptions about the boundaries between artificial and authentic, created and born, temporary and eternal. The brief love he had experienced with someone who existed at the margins of possibility had taught him truths about the human heart that no amount of traditional education or heroic training could have provided. In the end, the tragedy of Annie lay not in her artificial origins or her inevitable return to the consciousness that had created her, but in the demonstration that even the most manipulative circumstances could give rise to genuine beauty and authentic love when they encountered the right combination of innocence, compassion, and willingness to see beyond surface appearances to the deeper truths about what made existence meaningful and connections precious, regardless of their duration or the challenges that surrounded their formation. In the annals of friendship betrayed and hope transformed into horror, there exists no tale more devastating than that of Harvey Dent, the man who embodied every noble aspiration that Gotham City could nurture within the human spirit, yet whose transformation into something monstrous would forever haunt the dreams of those who had believed in the possibility of justice achieved through legal means rather than vigilante action. This is the chronicle of a fall so complete and irreversible that it challenged every assumption about redemption and the power of good intentions to triumph over the forces that seek to corrupt and destroy the best impulses of civilized society. The Harvey Dent who had captured the imagination and admiration of Gotham's citizens was more than merely another ambitious politician seeking personal advancement through public service, but rather a genuine idealist whose commitment to justice burned with such intensity that it illuminated possibilities for reform that had seemed impossible before his arrival on the political scene. His background as a prosecutor had been marked by unprecedented success in cases that others had considered unwinnable. His combination of legal, brilliance, and moral courage, creating a reputation that inspired both hope among honest citizens and fear among the criminal elements that had previously operated with impunity. The friendship that developed between Harvey Dent and Bruce Wayne was based on shared commitment to improving Gotham through their respective chosen methods. The recognition that both men were driven by similar desires to protect innocent life, while creating conditions that would allow justice and prosperity to flourish, rather than merely surviving in the spaces that corruption had not yet claimed. Their partnership represented the possibility that legal and extra-legal approaches to crime fighting could complement, rather than conflict with each other, when they were guided by compatible moral principles and mutual respect. The political campaign that elevated Harvey to the position of district attorney was conducted with unusual integrity and transparency. His refusal to accept donations from questionable sources or make compromises with corrupt interests, marking him as fundamentally different from the candidates who had previously sought such positions. His electoral victory was interpreted by many as evidence that Gotham's citizens were finally ready to support leaders who would prioritize justice over political expedience and personal advancement over public service. The prosecutorial victories that marked Harvey's early tenure as district attorney created unprecedented pressure on organized crime, while demonstrating that traditional legal methods could be effective against enemies who had previously seemed immune to conventional law enforcement approaches. His successful prosecution of cases that had languished for years under previous administrations provided concrete evidence that systemic change was possible when sufficient courage and competence were applied to problems that others had considered intractable. The enemies that Harvey's effectiveness created among Gotham's criminal establishment were not merely professional adversaries, but individuals whose entire way of life was threatened by his commitment to enforcing laws that had previously existed only on paper. Their desperation growing with each successful conviction that demonstrated the vulnerability of corruption when it encountered genuine determination and legal expertise. The threats against his life became increasingly serious and sophisticated as his work dismantled criminal organizations that had operated with impunity for decades. The relationship between Harvey and Grace Lamont provided him with emotional stability and personal happiness that balanced the enormous stresses of his professional responsibilities, while offering glimpses of the normal life that his commitment to justice made increasingly difficult to maintain. Her love and support created a sanctuary where he could temporarily escape from the constant dangers and moral complexities that characterized his work. Yet her very presence in his life also created new vulnerabilities that his enemies could exploit. The psychological pressure that accumulated during Harvey's campaign against organized crime began to manifest in subtle changes in his behavior and decision-making processes. The constant need for vigilance and the weight of responsibility for so many lives creating stress responses that even his exceptional mental resilience could not entirely contain. The coin that became his signature accessory was initially nothing more than a good luck charm inherited from his father, yet its symbolic significance would eventually expand to encompass far darker purposes than simple sentimental attachment. The trial that would ultimately seal Harvey's fate involved prosecuting Salvatore Maroni, one of Gotham's most powerful crime bosses, whose conviction would represent the most significant victory yet achieved against the organized criminal enterprises that had corrupted every aspect of the city's government and business community. The case was built on evidence that had been gathered through unprecedented cooperation between law enforcement agencies and required testimony from witnesses whose courage in coming forward had placed their own lives at risk. The courtroom where Harvey presented his case against Maroni was packed with observers who understood that they were witnessing either the beginning of a new era in Gotham's struggle against corruption or the destruction of the most promising reform movement in the city's recent history, the outcome carrying implications that extended far beyond the fate of any individual defendant or prosecutor. The media attention focused on the trial created additional pressure while also providing some protection against the kind of violent retaliation that might otherwise have been attempted. The flask of acid that Moroni had concealed upon his person was not discovered by security screening that had been designed to prevent conventional weapons, but had failed to anticipate such an exotic and horrible method of attack. The oversight that would prove catastrophic, resulting from assumptions about criminal behavior that underestimated the desperation and creativity that sufficient motivation could inspire. The moment when Moroni rose from the defendant's table and hurled the corrosive liquid at the prosecutor represented the intersection of legal justice with criminal vengeance in ways that no courtroom protocol could adequately address. The screams that filled the courtroom as the acid made contact with Harvey's face marked not merely the physical destruction of human tissue, but the psychological annihilation of everything that had made Harvey Dent who he was. The transformation from respected public servant to something that would inspire fear and revulsion in everyone who looked upon him. The damage was not limited to the obvious disfigurement, but extended to the deeper structures of identity and self-image that had provided the foundation for his entire approach to life and justice. The medical treatment that followed the attack was as thorough as contemporary science could provide. Yet the limitations of reconstructive surgery and pain management in cases involving such extensive tissue damage meant that Harvey's physical recovery would be incomplete at best, leaving him with visible reminders of the attack that would influence every social interaction for the remainder of his life. The psychological support that was offered proved even less adequate than the medical intervention, as traditional therapeutic approaches had no framework for addressing the specific combination of trauma, disfigurement, and loss of professional identity that characterized his situation. The emergence of the two-faced personality was not a sudden psychological break, but a gradual process of identity reconstruction that attempted to integrate the contradictory aspects of Harvey's existence into a functional framework that could accommodate both his continued commitment to justice and his desire for revenge against those who had destroyed his previous life. The coin that had once been a simple good luck charm became a sophisticated decision-making tool that allowed him to maintain some connection to his former moral principles, while also expressing the rage and desire for retribution that the attack had awakened within him. The philosophical framework that governed Two-Face's actions was based on the recognition that traditional concepts of good and evil were inadequate to address the complexities of a world where justice could be achieved only through methods that conventional morality would condemn, where the same act might serve both beneficial and destructive purposes depending on perspective and outcome. The coin flip that determined his choices in ambiguous situations represented not arbitrary decision-making, but a sophisticated understanding that moral certainty was often impossible, and that action required acceptance of uncertainty and risk. The first crimes that Two-Face committed were carefully planned operations that targeted individuals and organizations associated with the attack that had destroyed Harvey Dent, while also serving broader purposes related to his continued commitment to eliminating corruption and protecting innocent life. The duality that characterized these actions reflected the complex psychology of someone who retained his original moral convictions, while also embracing methods that those convictions would normally prohibit. Batman's initial encounters with his former ally revealed the extent of Harvey's transformation, while also demonstrating the inadequacy of traditional heroic approaches when dealing with someone whose motivations combined legitimate grievances with genuinely disturbed psychological processes. The Dark Knight's attempts to reach the Harvey Dent personality that still existed within Two-Face were complicated by the recognition that this fragmented individual was both victim and perpetrator, someone who deserved compassion yet posed genuine threats to innocent people. The nightmares that plagued Bruce Wayne following Harvey's transformation reflected not only grief for the loss of a valued friend, but also guilt over his failure to prevent the attack that had destroyed someone whose commitment to justice had rivaled his own. The recognition that Harvey's fate might have been avoided if different choices had been made, or better protection had been provided. The dreams in which both Harvey and his parents blamed Batman for failing to save them revealed the psychological burden that accumulated when even the most dedicated protector encountered limitations that made some tragedies unavoidable. The broken rib that Batman sustained during one of their confrontations was more than simple physical injury, but rather a symbol of how fighting someone who had once been an ally created wounds that transcended the merely corporeal, the recognition that some battles could not be won without destroying something valuable, regardless of which side ultimately prevailed. The pain that accompanied his every movement served as a constant reminder that heroism sometimes required accepting damage that could not be prevented or easily healed. Grace's attempts to reach Harvey's remaining humanity during their encounters demonstrated both the power of genuine love to transcend physical disfigurement and psychological damage, and the limitations of such emotional connections when they encountered mental illness that had fundamentally altered the person who was loved. Her willingness to see past his transformed appearance to the man she had known reflected courage that equaled any displayed by professional heroes. Yet her efforts also revealed how individual relationships could become casualties of larger conflicts over justice and revenge. The files that Two-Face had stolen from various criminal organizations contained evidence of corruption that extended far beyond the specific cases that Harvey had been prosecuting, information that could have been used to achieve the kind of comprehensive reform that he had originally sought through legal means. The irony that his criminal activities had provided access to evidence that his legitimate prosecutorial work had failed to uncover demonstrated how the system's own limitations sometimes forced those seeking justice to operate outside the boundaries that should have contained their activities. The confrontation with Thorne and his associates that provided Two-Face with the opportunity to exercise his coin-based justice represented the convergence of his dual nature with the practical realities of combating organized crime, the moment when his philosophical commitment to letting chance determine moral outcomes encountered specific individuals whose actions had caused genuine harm to innocent people. The coin flip that would determine Thorne's fate carried symbolic weight that extended far beyond the immediate question of one criminal's punishment, to encompass broader questions about how justice should be administered when traditional legal methods had proven inadequate. Batman's intervention that caused Two-Face to lose the coin in midair was motivated not merely by desire to prevent a murder, but by recognition that allowing Harvey to complete this particular act would represent a fundamental victory for the forces that had transformed him from idealistic prosecutor into vengeful criminal, the crossing of a line that would make any future rehabilitation impossible. The crate that knocked the coin from its trajectory served as a physical manifestation of the choice to preserve possibilities for redemption, even when such preservation came at considerable cost and risk. The rage that erupted when Two-Face realized that his carefully orchestrated moment of justice had been interrupted revealed the depth of psychological damage that the acid attack had caused, the extent to which his entire identity had become dependent upon the symbolic power of the coin and the decision-making framework it represented. The tantrum that followed was not merely emotional outburst, but the expression of existential crisis that occurred when the last remaining structure that provided meaning and purpose was threatened or undermined. Commissioner Gordon's recognition that Harvey Dent still existed somewhere within Two-Face's fractured personality provided hope that rehabilitation might eventually be possible, while also acknowledging the reality that such recovery would require resources and time that might not be available given the immediate dangers that his condition posed to public safety. The balance between compassionate treatment and protective custody represented ongoing challenges for a justice system that had no adequate precedents for dealing with criminals whose actions stemmed from both legitimate grievances and genuine mental illness. Batman's own coin flip at the episode's conclusion represented his desperate need to believe that chance might still favor the return of his friend despite overwhelming evidence that Harvey Dent had been permanently destroyed by the attack that created Two-Face, the gesture reflecting hope that transcended rational analysis while also acknowledging the role that luck and circumstance played in determining whether justice ultimately triumphed over corruption and evil. The head's result that should have brought satisfaction instead highlighted the inadequacy of symbolic gestures when confronted with genuine psychological transformation that could not be reversed through wishful thinking or heroic determination. The medical and psychiatric professionals who attempted to treat Two-Face's condition found themselves confronting a case that challenged established understanding of both physical trauma recovery and multiple personality disorders, as his specific combination of disfigurement, psychological fragmentation, and retained intellectual capabilities created treatment challenges that existing therapeutic frameworks could not adequately address. The experimental approaches that were attempted achieved limited success, while also revealing how thoroughly the attack had altered not merely his appearance, but the fundamental neural pathways that govern personality and decision-making processes. The legal questions raised by Two-Face's criminal activities involved unprecedented issues regarding criminal responsibility in cases where mental illness resulted from criminal assault, the extent to which victims of such attacks could be held accountable for subsequent actions that might be considered direct consequences of the original crime committed against them. The precedents established by his prosecution and treatment would influence future cases involving similar circumstances, while highlighting the inadequacy of existing legal frameworks for addressing complex questions about causation and moral responsibility. The ongoing relationship between Batman and Two-Face evolved into something that transcended traditional categories of heroism and villainy to encompass deeper questions about friendship, loyalty, and the extent to which people could maintain emotional connections to individuals who had been fundamentally changed by traumatic experiences. Their encounters became exercises in mutual recognition and loss, acknowledgements of what they had once meant to each other, combined with acceptance of what they had become. The symbolic significance of Harvey Dent's transformation extended beyond his individual tragedy to represent broader themes about the fragility of social progress and the ease with which corrupt forces could destroy the most promising attempts at reform through targeted violence against key individuals. His fall served as warning about the personal costs that public service could exact from those who chose to confront entrenched criminal interests, while also demonstrating the importance of protecting reformers from retaliation that could eliminate their contributions to social improvement. The coin that continued to govern Two-Face's decisions became a philosophical statement about the nature of moral choice in a universe where traditional ethical frameworks provided inadequate guidance for complex situations, where the difference between justice and revenge often depended on factors beyond individual control, and where the most important decisions might require acceptance of uncertainty rather than the false comfort of moral certainty. In the end, Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face represented one of Batman's most profound failures, not because the Dark Knight lacked the power to prevent the attack that destroyed his friend, but because even unlimited dedication to protecting others could not eliminate every source of danger or prevent every tragedy that corrupt individuals might inflict upon those who threatened their interests. The recognition that heroism had limitations that could not be overcome through superior skill, advanced technology, or moral commitment alone. In the heart of human cruelty disguised as entertainment, where society's rejection of those who fail to conform to arbitrary standards of normalcy becomes the foundation for systematic psychological torture, there exists a tale of such profound sadness that it illuminates the darkest corners of our collective capacity for both compassion and cruelty. This is the chronicle of Mary Louise Dahl, whose rare medical condition trapped her in the physical form of a child while her mind and spirit aged with all the complexity and pain that human consciousness must endure, creating a prison of flesh that would ultimately transform a talented performer into one of Gotham's most heartbreaking criminals. The condition that defined every aspect of Mary's existence was known to medical science as systemic hyperplasia, a rare genetic disorder that affected the normal processes of physical development while leaving intellectual and emotional growth entirely unimpaired, creating the cruel paradox of an adult consciousness trapped within a body that would forever bear the appearance of early childhood. The rarity of her condition meant that she existed in almost complete isolation from others who might have understood her unique challenges, forced to navigate a world that consistently mistook her physical appearance for a reflection of her mental and emotional capabilities. The early years of Mary's life were marked by the well-meaning but ultimately destructive attempts of adults to treat her according to her apparent rather than actual age. Their assumptions about her needs and capabilities based entirely on visual assessment that bore no relationship to the reality of her intellectual development and emotional maturity. The constant infantilization that characterized these interactions created psychological wounds that would never fully heal, teaching her that society would never see past her physical appearance to recognize the person who existed beneath the surface. The discovery of her theatrical talents occurred almost by accident during elementary school performances, where her unusual appearance made her a natural choice for roles that required actors who could convincingly portray very young characters while possessing the memory and discipline necessary to handle complex dialogue and staging requirements. The positive response that her performances generated provided the first indication that her condition might be transformed from curse into blessing if she could find ways to use her unique characteristics professionally rather than simply enduring them. The television show that launched Mary's career was a family situation comedy that capitalized on the novelty of her condition while providing her with opportunities to demonstrate acting abilities that went far beyond simple novelty or exploitation. Her performances revealing genuine talent that transcended the unusual circumstances of her casting. The character she portrayed was a precocious 3-year-old whose advanced vocabulary and sophisticated reasoning provided humor, while also allowing Mary to express aspects of her personality that her real-life interactions rarely accommodated. The success that the show achieved during its initial seasons created unprecedented opportunities for Mary to experience something approaching normal social interaction, as her fellow cast members and production staff gradually learned to see past her appearance, to recognize her actual capabilities, and treat her accordingly. The family atmosphere that developed on the set became the closest thing to genuine acceptance that she had ever experienced, providing her with relationships based on mutual respect and professional collaboration, rather than pity or curiosity. The creative satisfaction that Mary derived from her work extended beyond simple professional achievement to encompass the deeper fulfillment that came from using her talents in service of bringing joy to audiences who appreciated her. Performances without dwelling on the medical circumstances that made them possible. The fan mail that arrived, praising her comedic timing and emotional range, provided validation that her worth as a person extended beyond her novelty value as a medical curiosity, recognition that she was valued for what she could do, rather than merely for how she looked. The decline of the show's popularity was not attributable to any failure on Mary's part, but rather to the inevitable audience fatigue that affected all television programs after their initial novelty wore off, combined with network decisions based on demographic analysis and advertising revenue projections that treated artistic and human considerations as secondary to financial concerns. The introduction of additional child characters was intended to revitalize the series by providing new storylines and character interactions, yet it also diluted Mary's central role while creating opportunities for comparison that highlighted, rather than minimized, public fascination with her condition. The jealousy that Mary felt toward the new young actors who joined the cast reflected not professional competitiveness, but deeper psychological wounds related to her lifelong isolation from normal peer relationships. The recognition that these children would experience the natural progression from child roles to adult careers, while she remained forever trapped in characters that reflected her physical rather than chronological age. The resentment that grew within her was directed not at the children themselves, but at the system that valued them for their potential while limiting her to roles that emphasized her limitations. The decision to leave the show that had provided her with both career success and personal fulfillment was motivated by her growing awareness that the producers viewed her primarily as a curiosity whose commercial value was declining, rather than as a talented performer whose contributions deserved respect and consideration. The departure was presented as mutual agreement. Yet Mary understood that she was being discarded in favor of actors who could provide similar entertainment value without the complications that her unique situation created. The transition to dramatic acting represented Mary's attempt to transcend the limitations that her condition imposed, while demonstrating that her talents extended beyond comedy to encompass more serious and challenging material. Yet the entertainment industry's preconceptions about her capabilities proved nearly impossible to overcome. The casting directors and producers who evaluated her performances could not separate her actual abilities from their assumptions about what audiences would accept, their decisions based more on marketing considerations than artistic merit. The production of Macbeth that provided Mary with her most significant dramatic role was mounted by a theatre company that specialized in unconventional casting and experimental interpretations of classical material. Their willingness to look past her appearance to recognize her interpretive abilities, offering hope that serious dramatic work might be possible despite industry prejudices. The preparation for this challenging role required months of intensive study and rehearsal that pushed her capabilities while providing opportunities to work with fellow actors who judged her solely on professional rather than physical criteria. The critical reception that greeted Mary's dramatic debut was devastating in its dismissal of both her performance and the production company's decision to cast her in such demanding material. Reviews that focused almost entirely on the novelty of her appearance, rather than evaluating her actual achievement in bringing depth and nuance to one of literature's most complex characters. The failure was presented as an inevitable result of misguided casting rather than acknowledged as missed opportunity to recognize genuine talent that transcended conventional expectations. The return to her original television series was motivated by financial necessity and the hope that her previous success could be recaptured despite the changes that had occurred during her absence. Yet the reunion revealed how thoroughly her relationship with the show had been altered by both her departure and the continued evolution of the program in directions that no longer required her specific contributions. The producers who welcomed her back did so with obvious reluctance, their decision based more on desperation than genuine desire to restore her to prominence. The rejection that ended Mary's attempt to return to television work was delivered with characteristic industry callousness, the executives explaining their decision in terms that revealed their view of her as a problem to be solved, rather than a person whose career and livelihood were being destroyed by their choices. The final dismissal came not through formal termination, but through the gradual elimination of her scenes and storylines, until her presence on the show became so minimal that departure seemed like the only remaining option. The period of unemployment and professional exile that followed marked the beginning of Mary's psychological transformation from frustrated performer to someone whose relationship with society had been fundamentally altered by repeated experiences of rejection and humiliation, the accumulation of disappointments, creating resentment that gradually overwhelmed the positive aspects of her personality. The financial pressures that accompanied her career difficulties were compounded by the practical challenges of finding alternative employment when most opportunities required personal interaction that her appearance made problematic. The criminal enterprise that Mary eventually organized was motivated not by simple greed or desire for wealth, but by complex psychological needs related to her desire for recognition, control, and revenge against the industry that had exploited her unique characteristics while ultimately discarding her when she no longer served their purposes. The gang members she recruited were chosen not merely for their criminal skills, but for their willingness to treat her as a legitimate authority figure rather than a curiosity or object of pity. The kidnapping scheme that brought her into conflict with Batman targeted the cast members and producers who had been associated with her original television success, her plan designed to force them to acknowledge their role in her professional destruction, while also demonstrating her capability for the kind of complex planning and execution that their treatment of her had suggested she lacked. The elaborate nature of her criminal operation was intended to prove that her intelligence had never been adequately recognized or appropriately utilized. The abandoned toy store that served as headquarters for Baby Doll's criminal activities was chosen for its symbolic significance as much as its practical advantages, the location representing childhood dreams and innocence corrupted by adult cynicism and commercial exploitation. The dolls and toys that filled the space served as both props for her schemes and reminders of the childhood that her condition had simultaneously preserved and destroyed, physical objects that embodied the contradictions that defined her existence. The costume that Mary adopted for her criminal persona combined elements of her original television character with more sinister accessories that reflected her transformation from entertainer to criminal, the outfit serving multiple purposes as disguise, psychological armor, and statement about her relationship with the persona that had both created and ultimately destroyed her career. The baby doll appearance was simultaneously authentic representation of her physical reality and deliberate mockery of society's inability to see past surface appearances. The elaborate death trap that she prepared for her captives reflected both her theatrical background and her desire to create scenarios that would force her victims to experience something approximating the humiliation and helplessness that had characterized her own treatment by the entertainment industry, the mechanism designed to provide her with psychological satisfaction, while also serving practical purposes related to eliminating witnesses and avoiding legal consequences. Batman's investigation into the kidnappings revealed patterns that pointed towards someone with intimate knowledge of the entertainment industry and personal grudges against specific individuals. Yet the identity of the perpetrator remained elusive until the Dark Knight's research uncovered the tragic circumstances surrounding Mary's rise and fall in the television business. The discovery that these seemingly random crimes were actually components of an elaborate revenge scheme added layers of complexity to what might otherwise have been a straightforward rescue operation. The confrontation in the funhouse where Baby Doll had taken refuge created a battleground that was simultaneously practical fortress and psychological landscape. The mirrors and distorted images serving as physical manifestations of the self-perception issues that had shaped her criminal transformation, while also providing tactical advantages that compensated for her physical limitations in combat situations. The maze of reflections forced both pursuer and pursued to confront multiple versions of themselves while navigating toward their inevitable meeting. The moment when Mary caught sight of herself in the funhouse mirrors marked the climax of her psychological journey from victim to criminal, to something approaching self-awareness, the multiplied images forcing her to see herself as others saw her, while also confronting the reality of what she had become through her choices and actions. The realization that her appearance would forever limit others' perception of her was balanced by recognition that her actions had confirmed their worst assumptions about the relationship between physical appearance and moral character. The breakdown that followed this moment of clarity was not merely emotional collapse, but the beginning of a different kind of transformation. As Mary began to understand that her criminal activities had been motivated not by rational desire for justice, but by psychological needs that could never be satisfied through revenge or the acquisition of power over others. The tears that she shed were for the loss not only of her career, but of the person she might have been if society had been capable of seeing past her condition to recognize her humanity. Batman's response to Mary's obvious distress reflected his understanding that not all criminals were motivated by greed or malice, that some individuals were driven to illegal activities by circumstances that transformed victims into perpetrators, while leaving their fundamental humanity damaged but not entirely destroyed. The compassion that the Dark Knight showed for her suffering did not excuse her criminal actions, but acknowledged the legitimate grievances that had motivated her transformation into someone capable of kidnapping and potentially murdering innocent people. The conversation that passed between Batman and Baby Doll during her capture revealed the depth of loneliness and rejection that had shaped her criminal behavior, while also demonstrating that her capacity for connection and empathy had not been entirely destroyed by the experiences that had driven her to crime. The recognition that even Batman had experienced isolation and loss provided common ground that allowed for communication that transcended the immediate circumstances of her apprehension. The arrest and subsequent incarceration that followed Mary's capture represented not merely punishment for her crimes, but opportunity for the kind of psychological treatment and social support that might have prevented her criminal behavior if it had been available during the earlier stages of her career difficulties. The specialized care that she received acknowledged both her unique medical condition and the complex psychological factors that had contributed to her transformation from entertainer to criminal. The broader implications of Baby Doll's story extended beyond individual tragedy to encompass systemic questions about how society treated individuals whose physical differences made them objects of curiosity rather than recognition. The extent to which entertainment industries exploited unusual characteristics while failing to provide adequate support for performers whose careers were necessarily limited by the same factors that made them initially valuable. The legal proceedings that addressed Mary's criminal activities involved unprecedented questions about the relationship between social rejection, psychological damage, and criminal responsibility. The extent to which society's treatment of individuals with unusual conditions might be considered contributing factors in their subsequent illegal behavior. The precedents established by her case would influence future situations involving criminals whose actions seemed directly related to discrimination or exploitation based on physical differences. The medical community's renewed interest in studying Mary's condition was motivated both by desire to understand the psychological impact of systemic hyperplasia on social development, and by recognition that individuals with similar conditions might benefit from interventions designed to prevent the isolation and rejection that had characterized her experience. The research that emerged from her case contributed to improved support systems for people whose medical conditions created social challenges. The entertainment industry's response to the negative publicity generated by Mary's criminal career involved renewed attention to the treatment of performers with unusual characteristics, while also highlighting ongoing tensions between commercial exploitation and genuine artistic opportunity for individuals whose differences made them valuable to audiences seeking novelty and curiosity rather than authentic entertainment. The rehabilitation program that was eventually developed for Mary's specific needs combined traditional psychological therapy with specialized support for individuals whose medical conditions created unique social and professional challenges. Recognizing that effective treatment required addressing both her criminal behavior and the underlying factors that had contributed to her transformation from law-abiding citizen to dangerous criminal. The public interest in Mary's case reflected broader societal anxieties about the treatment of individuals who failed to conform to conventional standards of appearance and behavior, generating discussions about inclusion, discrimination, and the responsibility that communities bore for ensuring that all members received adequate support, regardless of their physical characteristics or medical conditions. In the end, the tragedy of Baby Doll was not that she had been born with a condition that limited her physical development, but that society had failed to provide her with the support and recognition necessary to channel her talents and intelligence into constructive rather than destructive purposes, demonstrating that individual criminal behavior often reflected broader systemic failures that transformed potential contributors into threats through neglect, exploitation, and rejection, rather than malicious intent or inherent moral deficiency. In the twilight realm where childhood dreams are shattered by adult cruelty and innocence becomes the first casualty of greed disguised as business necessity, there unfolds a tale of such devastating finality that it illuminates the precise moment when heroism is born, not from noble aspiration, but from the ashes of everything that once provided safety and meaning to a young soul. This is the chronicle of Richard John Grayson, the boy who would become the first Robin, yet whose transformation from carefree circus performer to masked vigilante required the destruction of his entire world through an act of premeditated murder that demonstrated how easily evil could corrupt the most joyous expressions of human achievement and artistic dedication. The circus that had been Dick Grayson's home since birth was not merely an entertainment enterprise, but a living community that preserved ancient traditions of physical artistry and collaborative performance. A world where skill and dedication were valued above conventional measures of success, while family bonds extended beyond blood relationships to encompass anyone who shared commitment to the demanding art of bringing wonder to audiences who had forgotten how to believe in magic. The Haley Circus represented something increasingly rare in modern society, an environment where individual excellence served collective purposes and where the pursuit of perfection was balanced by genuine care for the welfare of all community members. The Flying Graysons were the crown jewel of this remarkable institution, their aerial performances combining athleticism with artistry in ways that transcended mere entertainment to achieve something approaching the sublime. their movements through the air defying gravity with such grace that audiences often forgot they were watching human beings rather than beings touched by divine inspiration. The reputation they had earned throughout the circus world was based not merely on technical proficiency, but on their ability to transform the simple act of swinging through space into poetry that spoke to fundamental human desires for freedom, beauty, and transcendence of ordinary limitations. John and Mary Grayson had devoted their entire adult lives to perfecting their craft, while also nurturing their son's development as both performer and person. Their parenting philosophy, based on the circus tradition that children learned responsibility and excellence through participation in meaningful work, rather than through artificial separation from adult concerns and activities. The training that Dick received from infancy onward was rigorous yet infused with love, preparing him not merely to follow in his parents' footsteps, but to surpass their achievements, while maintaining the values that made such achievements worthwhile. The bond that united the three members of the Flying Graysons was strengthened rather than strained by the pressures of their profession, their shared commitment to excellence, creating intimacy that transcended ordinary family relationships, while their mutual dependence during performances fostered trust that extended into every aspect of their lives together. The moments they spent preparing for shows were opportunities for conversation and connection that deepened their understanding of each other, while reinforcing the principles that guided their approach to both performance and life. The young Dick, who ran through the circus grounds with the freedom and confidence of someone who had never known rejection or abandonment, embodied everything that childhood should represent. His laughter echoing through spaces where wonder was not merely tolerated, but celebrated as essential to human flourishing. His relationships with the other circus performers created an extended family that provided him with diverse models of how to live with integrity while pursuing excellence, each member of the community contributing to his education in ways that no conventional school could have matched. The circus lifestyle that might have seemed chaotic or unstable to outside observers provided Dick with forms of security and consistency that urban children rarely experienced. His home moving geographically, yet remaining constant in its commitment to values that prioritized artistic achievement, mutual support, and the preservation of traditions that connected present achievements to centuries of accumulated wisdom about performance, community, and the pursuit of beauty. The evening that would destroy this paradise began like countless others, with the familiar rituals of preparation that preceded each performance, the checking of equipment and review of routines that ensured audience safety, while allowing performers to focus entirely on the artistic expression that justified all their sacrifice and dedication. The excitement that always accompanied showtime was heightened by awareness that they were performing in Gotham City, one of the most sophisticated and demanding venues on their circuit, where success could enhance their reputation while failure might damage relationships with promoters and venue owners. The man who would orchestrate this tragedy was Anthony Zuko, known in criminal circles as someone whose approach to business disputes involved escalation rather than negotiation, whose reputation for violence had made him wealthy, while also ensuring that most potential victims paid his demands rather than risk the consequences of resistance. His appearance at the circus was not motivated by appreciation for artistic achievement, but by the cold calculation that entertainment enterprises often possessed liquid assets that could be easily obtained through appropriate pressure applied to vulnerable personnel. The extortion demand that Zuko presented to Mr. Haley was delivered with the casual efficiency of someone who had made similar proposals countless times before, his manner suggesting that compliance was expected while resistance would be met with consequences that far exceeded the financial cost of cooperation. The amount he demanded was carefully calculated to be manageable for a successful circus, while also substantial enough to demonstrate the seriousness of his intentions and establish his authority over future interactions. Mr. Haley's refusal to pay tribute to organized crime reflected not naive optimism about the ability of legal authorities to provide protection, but principled commitment to preserving the circus as an institution that remained independent of the corruption that had infected so many other aspects of urban life. His decision to resist Zuko's demands was based on understanding that once such payments began, they would continue indefinitely while gradually destroying the financial foundation that allowed the circus to maintain its artistic standards and community values. The conversation between Haley and Zuko was observed by several circus members, including young Dick, whose presence during this exchange ensured that he would later be able to identify the man responsible for the tragedy that followed, though at the time he could not fully comprehend the implications of what he was witnessing. The casual cruelty with which Zuko delivered his threats provided the boy with his first exposure to pure malice, the recognition that some people were willing to destroy others merely to demonstrate their power and advance their selfish interests. The deadline that Zuko established for Haley's compliance was designed to coincide with the evening's performance, creating maximum psychological pressure while also providing him with opportunity to demonstrate the consequences of resistance in ways that would be visible to the entire circus community. The timing ensured that any action he took would serve both as punishment for defiance and warning to others who might consider similar resistance to his future demands. The sabotage that Zuko's associates performed on the trapeze equipment was conducted with professional expertise that ensured the rigging would appear normal during preliminary safety checks, while failing catastrophically at precisely the moment when the flying Graysons reached the most dangerous portion of their routine. The acidic compound applied to specific stress points on the support cables was designed to weaken the metal gradually until the additional force generated by the family's aerial maneuvers would cause complete failure. The performance that preceded the tragedy was exceptional even by the Flying Graysons' usual standards, their movements through the air displaying confidence and artistry that held the audience spellbound, while creating the kind of shared experience that justified all the sacrifice and dedication required to maintain circus traditions in an increasingly commercial entertainment industry. The applause that greeted their initial routine elements was more than appreciation for technical skill, but recognition that they were witnessing something rare and precious in contemporary culture. Dick's position in the performance sequence placed him in the unique position of watching his parents' final moments from a vantage point that provided perfect visibility, while also ensuring that he would be powerless to intervene when the sabotaged equipment finally failed. The routine that had been practiced countless times proceeded normally until the instant when physics and criminal malice combined to transform familiar movements into fatal plunges toward the circus floor far below. The sound of snapping cables was followed immediately by the screams of audience members who realized they were witnessing not performance but catastrophe, their initial confusion giving way to horror as they understood that the figures falling through the air were no longer protected by the safety systems that had allowed previous generations of performers to take such risks. The silence that followed the impact was broken only by the crying of those who understood that they had watched the death of artists whose only crime had been their refusal to submit to criminal extortion. Dick's scream as he watched his parents fall was not merely expression of grief, but the birth cry of something new and terrible within his young psyche. The moment when innocence was murdered along with John and Mary Grayson and replaced by knowledge that would forever alter his relationship with the world and his understanding of his place within it. The boy who had awakened that morning as a beloved son in a community dedicated to wonder and beauty went to sleep that night as an orphan whose family had been destroyed by human evil, operating with casual efficiency. The investigation that followed the tragedy was complicated by the apparent accident nature of the equipment failure and the lack of obvious evidence pointing toward deliberate sabotage, though Dick's testimony about Zuko's threats provided investigators with leads that might eventually result in criminal charges if sufficient evidence could be developed. The challenge of proving murder, when the method involved mechanical failure rather than direct violence, created legal obstacles that allowed the guilty parties to escape immediate consequences, while the victims' families struggled with loss that could never be adequately addressed through conventional justice. The aftermath of the tragedy transformed the circus from joyous community into place of mourning, where every familiar sight carried reminders of loss, while the continuation of performances seemed both necessary for financial survival and somehow disrespectful to the memory of those who had died. The decision to maintain the show schedule while grieving was motivated not by callousness but by recognition that the circus community's survival depended on fulfilling contractual obligations that could not be cancelled without destroying the livelihoods of all remaining members. Bruce Wayne's presence at the circus on the night of the tragedy was initially coincidental, his attendance motivated by social obligations rather than particular interest in circus arts. Yet his witness to the deaths of John and Mary Grayson created immediate connection between his own traumatic history and the boy who was now experiencing similar loss under equally violent circumstances. The recognition of shared experience across the differences in their backgrounds and circumstances planted seeds of understanding that would eventually grow into one of the most important relationships in both their lives. The legal proceedings that determined Dick's future placement following his parents' deaths were complicated by his lack of immediate family and the circus community's limited ability to provide formal custody arrangements that would satisfy social service requirements, creating a situation where his emotional needs for continuity and stability conflicted with bureaucratic demands for conventional family structures. The possibility that he might be separated from the only community he had ever known added additional trauma to loss that was already overwhelming his capacity to process and integrate such devastating change. Bruce Wayne's offer to serve as Dick's guardian was motivated by genuine desire to prevent another child from experiencing the isolation and directionless anger that had characterized his own response to parental loss. Yet the decision also reflected his recognition that providing such protection might serve therapeutic purposes for both guardian and ward. The legal arrangements that formalized this relationship created opportunity for healing, while also establishing foundation for partnership that would eventually transcend conventional family bonds to encompass shared mission and collaborative dedication to preventing others from experiencing similar tragedies. The mansion that became Dick's new home provided material security and comfort that far exceeded anything the circus lifestyle could have offered. Yet, the psychological adjustment to such radically different surroundings required months of patient support from Alfred and Bruce, as the boys struggled to find meaning and purpose in circumstances that bore no resemblance to everything he had previously known. The luxury that surrounded him felt simultaneously overwhelming and inadequate, comfort without the community that had given comfort its significance. The discovery of Bruce Wayne's secret identity as Batman occurred gradually through Dick's observation of unexplained absences, mysterious injuries, and equipment that suggested activities far removed from conventional business responsibilities. His detective instincts, inherited from parents who had needed to understand mechanical systems thoroughly enough to trust their lives to precise calculations. The revelation that his guardian was Gotham's legendary protector provided context for understanding the motivation behind his adoption, while also suggesting possibilities for channeling his own desire for justice into meaningful action. The training that Bruce eventually agreed to provide was motivated by recognition that Dick's need for purpose and his desire to honor his parents' memory could be satisfied only through active participation in efforts to protect others from experiencing similar losses. Yet the decision to involve a child in such dangerous activities required careful consideration of ethical questions that had no easy answers. The balance between providing healthy outlets for grief and anger, while also ensuring adequate safety precautions, represented ongoing challenges that tested both participants' judgment and commitment. The creation of the Robin identity was designed to provide Dick with a role that honored his circus heritage, while also acknowledging his new mission as partner to the Dark Knight. The costume incorporating elements that connected him to his past, while also serving practical purposes related to mobility and protection during combat situations. The name itself carried multiple layers of meaning that reflected both his acrobatic background and his status as Herald of Dawn, following the long night of grief and adjustment. The first cases that Batman and Robin worked together provided opportunities for Dick to apply his unique skills and perspective, while also learning lessons about justice, responsibility, and the complex moral framework that guided heroic action in situations where conventional rules proved inadequate. The partnership that developed transcended traditional mentorship to become genuine collaboration between individuals whose different backgrounds and capabilities created synergy that enhanced their effectiveness, while also providing emotional support that neither could have achieved alone. The confrontation with Tony Zuko that eventually resulted from their investigative work represented closure of sorts for the tragedy that had destroyed Dick's original family while creating his new one. Yet, the satisfaction of bringing his parents' killer to justice was tempered by recognition that revenge could never restore what had been lost, or eliminate the pain that had become a permanent part of his psychological landscape. The choice to allow legal, rather than vigilante justice to determine Zuko's fate demonstrated Dick's commitment to principles that transcended personal desire for vengeance. The psychological impact of witnessing his parents' murder would continue to influence Dick's development throughout his career as Robin and beyond, providing him with intimate understanding of loss, while also motivating his dedication to ensuring that other families did not suffer similar tragedies through preventable criminal violence. The trauma that might have destroyed a less resilient individual was transformed through appropriate support and meaningful purpose into a source of strength that enhanced rather than diminished his capacity for heroic action. The circus community's response to Dick's transformation from performer to crime fighter reflected complex emotions, including pride in his achievements, concern for his safety, and recognition that his new role represented continuation rather than abandonment of values that had been instilled during his upbringing among people dedicated to excellence and service to others. The letters and visits from his former circus family provided continuity that helped maintain connection to positive aspects of his childhood, while supporting his adjustment to radically different circumstances and responsibilities. The broader implications of Dick Grayson's story extended beyond individual tragedy to encompass questions about how society responded to violence against families and communities. The extent to which traditional justice systems could address crimes that destroyed not merely individual lives, but entire ways of life that had cultural and historical significance. The recognition that the Flying Graysons' deaths represented loss not only to their family but to the broader artistic community that depended on such performers for continuity and inspiration added dimensions to the case that conventional legal frameworks struggled to address adequately. The legacy of that terrible night in Gotham continued to influence Dick's approach to heroism throughout his career, providing him with perspective that balanced understanding of evil's capacity for destruction with appreciation for the resilience and goodness that could emerge from even the most devastating circumstances when individuals chose to allay, transform suffering into service, and loss into motivation for protecting others from similar experiences. In the end, the murder of John and Mary Grayson served not merely as origin story for the first Robin, but as reminder that heroism often emerged from the ashes of tragedy when individuals possessed sufficient strength and support to channel their pain toward constructive rather than destructive purposes, demonstrating that the darkest moments in human experience could become foundations for the brightest expressions of courage, dedication, and selfless service to others who faced similar dangers and challenges. In these darkest moments that DC sought to shield from innocent eyes, we discover the profound truth that heroism is not born from strength or nobility, but from the alchemy of suffering transformed into service. Each horror Batman has witnessed, each failure that has scarred his soul, each moment of compassion in the face of absolute darkness, has forged the legend we know today. The torture of Robin taught him the price of mentorship. Barbara's fall revealed the weight of responsibility. Ace's death showed the power of simple human kindness. These shadows were never meant to be hidden because they were shameful, but because they reveal the terrible cost of choosing light in a world determined to embrace darkness. As Gotham sleeps under the protection of one who has seen the very worst of human nature, yet continues to believe in its potential for redemption, rest now in the knowledge that even the darkest nights eventually give way to dawn. The shadows that haunt the dark night are the very shadows that make his light shine brighter, proving that heroism is not the absence of darkness, but the courage to carry a candle into the deepest night.